"Breathe, sir," Annie Carter cried, her small hands trembling as she pushed against the wooden rack, crushing the man's chest. Dust from century-old oil paintings filled the room, and beneath the broken frames, Julian Whitmore's eyes were wide because he could not breathe. "Please take a deep breath," Annie said, though she could see he was trying and failing. L.P. The billionaire's eyes bulged as one hand clawed at the collar of his shirt, and the other searched helplessly across the empty floor. Annie looked at his chest, the tight pull of his throat, the panic in his face. "You have asthma," she said, almost speaking to herself, as if putting the truth into words could help her move faster. "You can't breathe." Then she remembered. "Your medicine," she said quickly. "Where is your medicine? Do you have an inhaler?" Missing," Julian whispered. Each word seemed to drain the last bit of air from him. "Someone took." "Okay," Annie cut in. "I understand. Don't talk anymore, sir. Save your strength." His fingers trembled against the floor. His lips had begun to pale. "Listen to me, sir. Breathe. Focus on my voice." Annie slid one arm behind his shoulders and helped him sit back against the wall. Her voice stayed steady, warm, and firm. "In through your nose, out through your mouth, slow. Don't panic. Panic will make your airways tighten more." Julian shook as he gripped Annie's thin arm. She tried to guide him farther from the fallen rack, closer to the ventilation grate where the air was clearer. "Wait right here," she said. She ran toward the night shift administrative office, her shoes sliding on the polished floor. Annie's heart pounded hard in her chest, but she forced herself not to panic. "Stay calm, Annie. Think," she muttered, yanking open each cabinet in the small kitchen. "There has to be something here. Mint, thyme, ginger. That's right. Grandma used to say that." She pulled out a small wooden tea box, her trembling hands rummaging through the packets of herbs the office staff usually used during late meetings. "Steam, warmth, stillness," Annie whispered, as if she were hearing her grandmother's voice again in her head. "It's not medicine, but it might help him breathe a little easier. Just keep him awake until the ambulance gets here. Please, Annie. You have to do this." Less than 2 minutes later, Annie hurried back with a paper cup of warm herbal tea. She knelt beside Julian and lifted his head carefully. "Drink, sir. Small sips only. Warm herbal tea may help open your bronchial tubes a little. Just enough until the ambulance gets here. Trust me." Annie dropped to her knees. "Sir, can you hear me?" He gave the smallest nod. "I'm calling 911. She pulled out her phone, hit emergency, and put it on speaker with shaking fingers. While the dispatcher answered, Annie scanned the wreckage. "My name is Annie Carter," she told the dispatcher. "I'm at Whitmore and Vale Art Storage, West Restoration Wing. A man is trapped under a collapsed painting rack. He's breathing, but not well. I think he has asthma. There's heavy dust in the room." The dispatcher told her help was on the way and asked if the man was conscious. "Barely," Annie said. "Sir, keep looking at me." Julian's fingers kept searching his coat. "His inhaler is missing," Annie said, more to herself than the phone. She checked the floor near him, under torn canvas, beside a cracked frame. Nothing. She looked at the collapsed rack. "I'm going to get some weight off him." The dispatcher warned her not to move him unless he was in immediate danger. "He can't breathe where he is," Annie said. She wedged a loose wooden stretcher beneath the rack and pushed down with all her strength. Julian made a rough sound, half pain, half air. "I'm sorry," Annie whispered. I know. Just give me a little more." She brought the cup back toward him. "Drink a little more, sir. It may help you some, but don't drink too fast. Try to breathe with it." Julian's eyes fixed on her. There was fear there, but also something else now. Awareness, effort. "You're doing good," Annie said. "The ambulance is coming. You just stay stubborn for me." His hand closed weakly around her wrist. His skin was cold. He tried to speak. "No, save your breath." But he tightened his grip, and Annie leaned closer. "Behind," he whispered. "What?" His eyes moved toward the covered portrait table beyond the fallen rack. The portrait, his breath hitched. "Not the original." Annie stared at him. "What portrait?" "Sir?" His lips moved again, but the sound disappeared. His head sagged sideways just as sirens began to wail outside the building. "No," Annie said, touching his cheek. No, Mr. Whitmore, stay with me. You hear those sirens? They're here for you. Red light flashed across the storage room walls. Annie stood alone among broken frames, old dust, and paintings that had seen richer men lie for less. Before Julian lost consciousness completely, Annie stumbled out into the corridor and shouted toward the security desk. Mr. Brooks, please help me. Mr. Whitmore isn't all right. Elijah Brooks, the old night guard. His face changed the moment he saw Annie's dust-covered uniform and trembling hands. What happened to him? Asthma, sir, Annie said, breathless. He can't breathe. I already called an ambulance. Please help me get him out. Elijah moved faster. He followed Annie into the storage room, and when he saw Julian Whitmore half-trapped beneath the fallen rack, his mouth fell open. Lord have mercy, he whispered. Help me lift this side, Annie said. Not too much, just enough to get the pressure off his chest. Together, they shifted the broken wooden support and dragged away 2 fallen frames. Elijah braced one arm under Julian's shoulder, while Annie guided his head and kept his body upright. Easy, Mr. Whitmore, Elijah said, his voice shaking. Easy now. Help is coming. Julian tried to breathe. Annie kept the cup of warm herbal tea close to his mouth, letting him take only the smallest sips, whispering for him to slow down, to follow her voice, to stay with her. The sirens arrived minutes later. Paramedics rushed in with oxygen, bags, and a stretcher. One of them took over Julian's breathing support while another checked his pulse and asked Annie what had happened. Annie answered as clearly as she could. Collapsed rack, heavy dust, asthma attack, missing inhaler, warm tea, 911 call. They lifted Julian onto the stretcher and rolled him down the corridor. Annie followed a few steps behind, still clutching her fawns. At the ambulance doors, a nurse turned sharply. I need someone to go with him, she said, someone who saw what happened. Annie hesitated. Elijah looked at her and spoke quickly. You go, child. I'll stay here and call Mr. Crane. But Mr. Brooks, go, he said, gentler now. You were with him. They'll need you. The doors slammed shut. The ambulance tore through the night with its siren screaming over Thevenuel. Inside the narrow compartment, a paramedic leaned over him, checked the monitor, then glanced at Annie while writing on a clipboard. You're the girl who gave him that herbal drink? Annie straightened a little. Yes, ma'am. You work in medicine? No, ma'am, Annie said quickly. I'm just night staff. Cleaning and restoration support at the art storage center. The paramedic looked back at Julian. You stayed calm for somebody who's just night staff. Annie looked down at her hands. They were still trembling, still marked with dust and old paint from the floor. My grandmother used to do things like that when people had breathing trouble. It was only tea from the office, kitchenette, peppermint, thyme, and ginger. Just a little. She said it carefully because she was afraid of being misunderstood. Afraid someone might think she had given Julian something strange, something wrong, something a girl like her had no right to give. Peppermint to soothe the throat, Annie added. Thyme to help the breathing feel easier. Ginger to keep him warm. I know it's not medicine. I just thought maybe it could help him hold on until you got there. The paramedic's expression softened. You didn't replace medicine. You bought time. With an asthma attack that's severe, heavy dust exposure, and no inhaler, time matters. Annie swallowed. The woman checked Julian's pulse again. Lucky for him you were there. Still, he was breathing. For that, Annie let herself feel one small breath of relief. When the ambulance pulled into the emergency entrance of Street Bartholomew International Medical Center, the doors opened before Annie was ready. Annie stepped down after them, her legs unsteady. Before she could follow, a black luxury sedan braked hard behind the ambulance. Its doors opened almost at the same time. A man handsome and a woman followed. They did not run after Julian's stretcher. They stopped in front of Annie. The man's eyes moved from her face to her uniform, to the stains on her apron, to her hands, then back to her skin. Who are you? He demanded. Why were you in the ambulance with my father? Annie clasped her hands together. My name is Annie Carter. I worked the night shift at Whitmore and Vale. The rack collapsed, and I found him. I called 911 and, oh, the woman cut in, her heels striking the polished pavement as she came closer. So it was you. Annie blinked. Ma'am? The woman looked her over with open disgust. A cleaning girl? What were you doing in the VIP storage area after midnight? I was working, Annie said. Mr. Crane had me cleaning the restoration wing. The man stepped closer. That area is restricted. I heard the crash. And you just happened to be there? His voice lowered. Beside my father. In a private storage room. Near paintings worth millions. Annie's mouth went dry. He couldn't breathe. His inhaler was missing. I was trying to help him. The woman folded her arms. How convenient. Vivian, the man said, though he did not sound as if he disagreed with her. Vivian Whitmore's eyes stayed on Annie's hands. Look at her, Nathaniel. Paint on her fingers, dust all over her, and we're supposed to believe she simply wandered into a secured room out of kindness? I didn't wander in, Annie said, the words shaking despite her effort to keep them steady. I heard something fall. I ran in. Nathaniel Whitmore leaned toward her. Or you staged a scene, hid his medication, waited until he collapsed, then played savior so you could come after this family for money. Annie stepped back as if he had struck her. No, I swear I didn't. Don't swear at me, Nathaniel snapped. My father is Julian Whitmore. His life is not some opportunity for you. A sharp voice called from behind them. Mr. Whitmore. Harold Crane hurried across the ambulance bay, breathless, his tie crooked, and his face flushed from the cold. Annie turned toward him with desperate relief. Mr. Crane, she said, please tell them. You know I was assigned to clean that wing tonight. Crane stopped beside Nathaniel and Vivian. For 1 second, his eyes met Annie's. She saw the calculation there before he spoke. Mr. Whitmore, Mrs. Whitmore. I am terribly sorry, Crane said, dipping his head. I had no idea she would behave so recklessly. Annie froze. Crane turned toward her, his face hardening. I assigned you to the outer hall and supply area, not the VIP storage room. That's not true, Annie whispered. You were told repeatedly to stay away from restricted artwork. No, I wasn't. You told me to clean after everyone left. Crane's mouth tightened. This is not the time for more lies. Vivian gave a small, satisfied breath. Nathaniel looked at Annie as if the matter had now been settled. You see, he said, there are no coincidences this neat. Annie felt heat rise behind her eyes. I saved him. Nathaniel's expression did not change. That remains to be seen. If Annie's courage and pain touched your heart, please like this video. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from, because someone near you may be watching this story too. And don't forget to subscribe for more emotional and inspiring stories. A doctor appeared at the sliding doors. Family of Julian Whitmore? Nathaniel and Vivian turned at once. I'm his son, Nathaniel said. The doctor nodded. Come with me. We're stabilizing him now. Vivian touched his arm, and together they moved toward the doors. Crane lingered long enough to look back at Annie. You should go collect your things, he said quietly, before the police decide they want to ask why you were where you didn't belong. Annie stared at him. You know what happened. I know you are done at Whitmore and Vale. His voice dropped. And if you have any sense, you will stop talking before this becomes worse for you. Then he followed the Whitmores inside. Annie stood alone beneath the emergency entrance lights. For a moment she could not move. Then she walked away. By the time she reached the building, it was close to 3 in the morning. The front entrance was locked, but the side employee door still opened. She packed slowly at first, then faster when her hands began to shake. She was not only losing a job, she was losing the first place that had let her stand near real art, even if it had only allowed her there after dark. As she zipped the bag, her eyes drifted toward the corner of the room. The portrait was still there, and Julian's broken whisper returned to Annie like a bell inside her skull. Behind, the portrait, not the original. She stopped crying. Slowly, she walked toward the examination table. Don't, she whispered to herself, but her feet kept moving. She knelt near the lower corner of the frame and leaned close. At first glance, the portrait looked perfect, too perfect. Annie bent closer to the lower edge. No, she breathed. The lining at the back was wrong. Now the backing was clean. The stitches were straight. The corner smelled faintly of fresh adhesive beneath the old varnish scent. Annie touched the side of the table, not the painting, as if she needed something solid to hold her upright. No. Julian had been right. The painting was not the original. The truth came together so quickly it frightened her. The collapsed rack. The missing inhaler. The disabled quiet of the storage room. Julian's unfinished warning. Nathaniel and Vivian arriving ready to accuse before they even asked whether the old man would live. Crane lying without blinking. This was not an accident. They had tried to kill Julian Whitmore to protect a lie worth millions. Annie stood in the broken consignment room with her notebook open, her breath shallow, and the false portrait watching her from the table. The building had gone too quiet. Even the old ventilation system seemed to hold itself still, as if the walls knew something had happened inside them and were waiting to see who would be blamed for it. She wanted to run. Every sensible part of her told her to zip her backpack, leave through the side door, catch the first bus home, and never speak Julian Whitmore's name again. People like Nathaniel did not need to prove a girl like Annie was guilty. They only needed to make the accusation sound expensive enough. But if she walked away now, the truth would leave with her. Annie wiped her face with the sleeve of her uniform and forced herself to look again. Not at the painted woman's face. Faces were where forgers spent their love. She looked at the lower edge, the backing, the staples, the quiet places where lies got lazy. Her grandmother used to say a painting had a front for strangers and a back for honest people. Annie took out her phone and snapped 3 quick pictures of the lower corner, the back lining, and the altered crack near the blue sleeve. Her hand shook so badly. The first picture blurred. She steadied her wrist against the table and tried again. She did not touch the canvas. She would not give them that. A sound came from the hallway. Annie froze. "Miss Annie?" It was Elijah Brooks. She turned so fast her shoulder bumped the table. Elijah stood in the doorway. His navy security jacket zipped to his chin, one hand resting near the wall as if he had been walking carefully through the damage. His face was lined, his eyes sharp. He looked at the backpack on her shoulder, the notebook in her hand, then at the covered portrait. "You came back," he said. "I had to get my things. At 3 in the morning, folks usually only come back for things they forgot or things they fear somebody else might find." Annie swallowed. "Mr. Crane fired me." Elijah's jaw tightened, but he did not look surprised. "He called me from the hospital, told me to lock your employee code after tonight." Annie gave a small, bitter laugh. "After tonight? That's generous." Elijah stepped inside and lowered his voice. "What did you see?" Annie looked toward the door behind him. "You don't want to know. Child, I have worked nights in rich buildings for 40 years. I know plenty I never wanted to know." She hesitated. The words felt dangerous in her mouth. "The portrait is fake." Elijah did not speak at once. His eyes moved slowly to the table. "You sure?" "No," Annie said, then shook her head. "Yes. I mean, I'm not certified. I don't have a degree. I don't have anything they respect. But I know what I saw. Tell me." She showed him the notebook, the small sketch she had made weeks ago, the pictures on her phone. She explained the blue pigment, the false cracking, the clean backing, the missing uneven stitching. The more she spoke, the less like a frightened fired employee she sounded. Her voice found steadiness in the details. Elijah listened without interrupting. When she finished, he looked at the portrait for a long moment and said, "Then Mr. Whitmore knew." Annie nodded. "Before he passed out," he said, "behind the portrait, not the original." Elijah closed his eyes briefly. "Lord, I think someone switched it. I think the rack falling wasn't an accident." His inhaler was gone. He said someone took it. Elijah opened his eyes. "Did you tell Crane that?" "No, I almost did, but he looked scared when I said Mr. Whitmore spoke." "Not worried. Scared. That man doesn't scare easy unless his paycheck is standing behind the danger." Annie looked at him. "Do you believe me?" The question came out smaller than she wanted. Elijah's face softened. "I believed you before you asked." That nearly broke her. She looked down, pressing her lips together, refusing to cry again in that room. Elijah walked to the security panel beside the door and glanced at the small green light above it. "Something happened with the cameras tonight." Annie looked up. "What do you mean?" System showed a maintenance pause on the West Hall feed. 15 minutes. During the accident? Close enough to make a man curious. "Can you pull the footage?" "Not from here. Crane controls the archive login, but I keep my own notes." He tapped his temple, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded pocket notebook. Old habit. Back when systems went down and managers blamed whoever couldn't afford a lawyer. He flipped through the pages. Annie saw neat handwriting. Times, initials, small observations. At 11:42 p.m., he had written, West heat lamps off, crane access. At 11:47, service elevator active, no scheduled move. At 11:54, West Hall camera maintenance pause. At 12:03, crash call. Annie stared at the entries. You wrote all this down? I write down anything that smells wrong. The heat lamps were off? For preservation, they shouldn't have been. Not with that portrait staged for auction. Annie felt the pieces shift in her mind. If the lamps were off, sensors might not catch a temperature change near the table. Elijah nodded slowly. Or somebody needed the room dark and quiet for a move. A crate, Annie whispered. The real portrait could have been moved out. Maybe. And the fake brought in. Maybe. She looked at the fallen rack. Then they made it look like an accident. Elijah's face hardened and left Mr. Whitmore without his breathing medicine. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room felt colder than before. Annie pulled her phone closer to her chest. What do I do? First, you get out of here before Crane comes back. Second, you copy those pictures somewhere safe. Send them to yourself, to someone you trust, anybody they can't scare easy. I don't have many people. You got me. Annie looked at him. He said it plainly, without drama, as if offering help was no larger than holding a door. Elijah, if they find out you helped me, he gave her a look. I've been called worse things than unemployed. This isn't just losing a job. No, he said. It isn't. A phone rang somewhere in the hall. Both of them went still. Elijah stepped to the doorway and listened. The ringing stopped. A moment later, the front security desk phone began ringing again. That'll be Crane, Elijah said. Or somebody asking whether you're still here. Annie zipped her backpack. I should go. Use the loading exit. Camera there's old, half blind, and mostly pointed at the trash bins. She almost smiled despite herself. You know all the broken things in this place. Broken things tell the truth if you pay attention. Annie moved toward the door, but stopped beside the portrait. The painted woman in blue stared past her shoulder, calm and false. Annie felt anger rise through her fear. Not loud, not wild, but clean. They're going to sell it, she said. People will stand in that auction room and call it history. Elijah answered quietly. Then history better hope you make it there first. Annie pulled the linen cloth back over the painting. She did it carefully. Not because the fake deserved tenderness, but because her hands had been raised to respect the work even when people disrespected her. At the loading exit, Elijah opened the door and checked the alley. New York's cold air rolled in, smelling of rain, garbage bags, and the bakery down the block starting its morning bread. The sky was still black, but somewhere beyond the buildings the city was preparing to wake as if nothing had changed. Go straight home, Elijah said. Don't answer unknown numbers. And Annie? She turned. Don't tell yourself this is too big for you. That's what men like them count on. Annie nodded, though she did not yet believe him. She stepped into the alley with her backpack on one shoulder and her phone clutched in her hand. Behind her, the door clicked shut, and for the first time that night, she was truly alone. At the corner, she sent the photos to her own email. Then to a second account she had made years ago and barely used. She attached the notes quickly, her thumbs stiff from cold. Blue pigment too new, backlining changed, crack pattern false, heat lamps off 15 minutes, camera pause. Whitmore said not original. She hit send. Only then did she let herself breathe. The bus stop was 2 blocks away. Annie walked fast, head down, passing shuttered galleries, a deli with its lights still on, and a man hosing the sidewalk outside a restaurant that would never hire someone like her for the front room. Her reflection moved beside her in dark windows. Gray uniform, dusty hair, old backpack, a girl carrying a truth nobody wanted. By the time the bus came, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She stared at it until it stopped. Then a text appeared. Miss Carter, this is Harold Crane. Do not discuss tonight's incident with anyone. Company counsel will contact you. A second message followed before the bus doors opened. For your own good, stay quiet. Annie looked at the words while the driver waited. You getting on or not? He asked. She climbed aboard, paid with her Metro card, and took a seat near the back. The bus smelled of wet coats and burnt coffee. A nurse slept against the window. An older man held a paper bag of groceries against his chest. Ordinary people, going home or going to work, carrying burdens no headline would ever name. Annie looked down at her phone again. For your own good, stay quiet. She thought of Julian gasping under the rack. She thought of Nathaniel's cold smile. She thought of Vivian looking at her hands as if dirt and guilt were the same thing. Then she locked the screen and slipped the phone into her pocket. For the first time in her life, Annie understood that silence could be a kind of permission, and she was done giving it. By the time Annie reached home, dawn had begun to thin the sky over Brooklyn. The bus let her off 2 blocks from the small apartment she shared with her mother, and she walked the rest of the way with her backpack pressed against her side as if someone might reach out and take it. The street was waking slowly. A delivery truck idled near the corner bodega. A woman in scrubs hurried toward the subway with coffee in one hand. Somewhere above Annie, an old window unit rattled against the first cold breath of morning. Her apartment building stood between a laundromat and a closed tax office. 3 stories of tired brick with a front step that dipped in the middle. Annie had never thought it beautiful, but when she saw the yellow kitchen light glowing behind their second-floor curtain, her throat tightened. Her mother was awake. Denise Carter opened the door before Annie could find her key. Bobby. That one word held everything Annie had tried not to feel since the hospital. The fear. The humiliation. The weight of Nathaniel's finger pointed at her face. The way Vivian had looked at her hands. Annie stepped inside and tried to say she was fine, but the lie broke before it became sound. Denise pulled her into the kitchen and shut the door. Sit down. Mama, I'm okay. You are standing in my kitchen covered in dust before 6 in the morning. Sit. Annie sat. The kitchen was small, warm, and familiar. A kettle sat on the stove. A half-finished crossword lay beside Denise's reading glasses. Bills were clipped to the refrigerator under a magnet from Coney Island, faded from years of sunlight. On the table was a plate with toast gone cold, untouched because Denise had been waiting, not eating. She looked at Annie's hands first. You hurt? Not bad. That is not an answer. A scrape. From the rack. Denise got a clean cloth and ran warm water over it. She had worked 20 years in a nursing home before her knees made every shift feel like punishment. She still cleaned wounds like she was on duty, quiet and firm, saving her worry for later. Tell me from the beginning, she said. Annie told her about the crash. Julian trapped under the rack. The missing inhaler. The tea. Mr. Brooks helping her. The ambulance ride. She told her how Nathaniel and Vivian had arrived, how they had accused her before asking if Julian would live. She told her about Mr. Crane lying. Denise's hand stopped over the scrape. He said what? He said he assigned me to the outer hall. He lied right there in front of them. Denise pressed the cloth gently against Annie's palm again. But her jaw had tightened. Some people don't need a gun to hurt you. They just need a clean shirt and somebody powerful listening. Annie looked down. They're going to say I tried to steal from them. Did you? Mama. I asked because I want you to hear yourself answer. No. Then don't let their voice become louder inside you than yours. Annie shut her eyes. She had been strong in the storage room, strong in the ambulance, strong when Crane looked at her like a problem to erase. But in her mother's kitchen, with the kettle hissing and warm water touching her hand, she felt 18 again. He was dying, she whispered. I helped him. Why did they look at me like I was dirty? Denise did not answer right away. She wrapped a bandage around Annie's palm, smoothed the edge with her thumb, then sat across from her. Because some folks can watch you pull a man from the fire and still ask why your hands are black with smoke. Annie's eyes filled. Denise reached across the table and held her wrist. Listen to me. Their suspicion is not your sin. The words settled between them. Annie pulled her phone from her coat pocket and opened the pictures she had taken. There's more. Denise leaned closer. Annie showed her the portrait, the crack pattern, the backing, the notes. She explained what Julian had whispered before he lost consciousness. Denise did not understand art restoration, not the way Annie did, but she understood fear when it had a reason. You think they switched that painting? I know they did. And the accident? I think it was supposed to kill him. Denise sat back slowly. The kitchen seemed to grow smaller around them. You need police. I don't have enough proof. You need a lawyer. I can't afford a lawyer. You need to call that guard. I already sent him the photos. Denise looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then you need to stop carrying this alone. Annie wanted to say she could handle it, but her phone buzzed before she could speak. Unknown number. Both of them stared at it. It stopped. Then another text appeared. Company counsel requires your full cooperation. Any false claims regarding Whitmore family property will result in legal action. A second message followed. Return all company materials immediately. Failure to comply may be treated as theft. Annie's fingers went cold. They're already doing it, she said. Denise took the phone and read the messages twice. They don't even wait for breakfast, do they? What am I supposed to do? First, you eat something. Mama, I am serious. Fear works better on an empty stomach. Denise stood, put the kettle back on, and opened the cabinet. There was not much inside. Oatmeal, tea, peanut butter, crackers. She made what she could and placed it in front of Annie with the kind of care that made poverty feel less like shame and more like survival. Annie took a bite because arguing with Denise Carter before sunrise had never ended well. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Mr. Brooks. She answered on speaker. "Miss Annie," Elijah said, his voice low. "You home safe?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Don't go back to Whitmore and Vale. Crane's been asking security if you took anything." Annie closed her eyes. Denise leaned toward the phone. "Mr. Brooks, this is Annie's mother. Did my daughter take anything?" "No, Mom." "Then I hope you are writing that down too." A small pause. "Already did." Denise's face softened by half an inch. "Good." Elijah continued. "There's something else. A transport crate left through the private loading bay at 11:48 last night. No standard, two-person sign-off. Crane marked it as climate equipment." Annie sat straighter. "The real painting. Could be. Do you know where it went?" "Not yet, but I saw the driver. Man named Victor Lorne signed the contractor sheet." Annie's breath caught. She knew the name. Anyone who read old restoration scandals knew it. Victor Lorne had once been praised as a conservation genius before rumors followed him from gallery to gallery. Rumors about paintings that came back too clean, too improved, too profitable. "He's a forger," Annie said. Elijah's voice lowered further. "Then you better keep those pictures safe." After the call ended, Denise reached for Annie's notebook and turned it gently in her hands. "Your grandma would have known what to do with this. She would have told me not to touch rich people's trouble." "No," Denise said. "She would have told you not to touch it with dirty hands. Then she would have washed up and gone right back in." Despite everything, Annie almost smiled. By mid-morning, the first consequence arrived. An email from Whitmore and Vale appeared in her inbox. Termination effective immediately. Violation of restricted access policy. Pending internal review. Return all property. No further contact with clients, staff, press, or third parties regarding confidential events. Annie read it once. Then again. The words were neat, official, and bloodless. Denise read over her shoulder. "They fired you for saving a man?" "They fired me for seeing too much." A knock sounded at the apartment door. Both women went still. Denise motioned for Annie to step back, then looked through the peephole. "Who is it?" A man's voice answered from the hallway. Calm, formal, older. "Mrs. Carter? My name is Samuel Price. I work for Julian Whitmore. I am alone. Mr. Whitmore asked me to find Annie Carter." Annie's heart kicked against her ribs. Denise did not open the door. "Mr. Whitmore is unconscious." "He was," Samuel said. "He woke for less than 2 minutes. Long enough to ask where the girl was. Long enough to say his son was lying." Annie gripped the back of the kitchen chair. Denise looked at her, then back at the door. "And why should we believe you?" Samuel was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Not weaker, just more honest. "Because Miss Carter saved his life, and the people around him are already trying to decide what her silence is worth." Denise unlocked the deadbolt but left the chain on. She opened the door only a few inches. Samuel Price stood in the hallway with both hands visible. A dark overcoat buttoned neatly. Silver at his temples. Worry held behind discipline. He did not try to look past Denise into the apartment. He did not ask to come in. His eyes found Annie over her mother's shoulder. "Miss Carter," he said, "Mr. Whitmore believes you hurt him. He also believes you may be in danger." Annie thought of the false portrait, the missing inhaler, the transport crate, the text messages, The way Nathaniel had looked at her like she was something to be solved. She wanted to be afraid. She was afraid, but fear no longer felt like a reason to be quiet. "What did he tell you?" Annie asked. Samuel looked down the hallway once, then back at her. "He told me to find the girl who helped him breathe," he said, "before his family does." Denise Carter did not remove the chain from the door. She looked at Samuel Price for a long moment, studying his polished shoes, his careful posture, the way he kept his hands where she could see them. Men from rich houses often arrived with calm voices and papers that ruined lives. Denise had learned not to confuse manners with mercy. "Before his family does," she repeated. "That sounds like a threat." "It is a warning," Samuel said. "Not from me." Annie stood behind her mother with her fingers wrapped around the back of the kitchen chair. Her whole body wanted to step forward and step back at the same time. "What does Mr. Whitmore remember?" she asked. Samuel turned his eyes to her. He did not look at the dust still caught in her hairline, or the old uniform, or the tiny apartment behind her. He looked at her face, enough to know the accident was not simple. Enough to know he said something to you. Enough to know his inhaler should not have been missing. Denise's mouth tightened. "And where was this concern when his son was accusing my daughter at the hospital?" Mr. Whitmore was unconscious then, and the rest of them were wide awake. Samuel lowered his head once. "Yes, ma'am, they were." That answer quieted the hallway more than an excuse would have. Denise unhooked the chain but did not open the door wide. "You can stand right there and talk. I'm not inviting trouble to sit at my table until I know its last name." Samuel accepted that without offense. "Fair." Annie stepped closer. "Did Mr. Whitmore tell you about the painting?" "He tried. His breathing was poor, and the doctor only allowed a few questions. He said, 'Portrait, not original, and then your name.'" "My name?" He asked whether Annie Carter was safe. The words hit her harder than she expected. In the hospital driveway, she had been called suspicious, reckless, convenient. Julian Whitmore, barely able to breathe, had remembered her name. Denise heard the catch in Annie's breath and moved half a step closer to her daughter. Samuel continued. "His son told him you had been thanked and paid. Mr. Whitmore did not believe that." "Because it's a lie," Annie said. "I know." "No," she said, sharper now. "You don't know. You didn't stand there while they looked at me like I crawled out from under that rack with his wallet in my hand." Samuel's face did not change, but something in his eyes did. "No, I did not. And I am sorry. Sorry doesn't get my job back. No, it does not. Sorry doesn't stop Mr. Crane from calling me a thief. No. Sorry doesn't make people in that world believe a girl like me over a man with a last name carved on buildings." Samuel paused. "That is why we need proof." Denise folded her arms. "There it is. You need something from her." "Yes," Samuel said, "but not her silence, her eyes." Annie looked down at her bandaged palm. "I took pictures." Samuel's attention sharpened, but he did not move toward her. "Of the portrait, the back lining, the crack pattern, the lower corner. I sent copies to myself and to Mr. Brooks." "Good. I didn't touch the canvas." "Better." Denise looked at Annie. "You didn't tell me you sent them to Elijah." "I was scared." "You were smart." Samuel reached slowly into his coat and removed a card. He held it out. "Not to Annie, but to Denise. This is my private number. Not the office. Not Mr. Whitmore's family line. If anyone contacts Miss Carter, if anyone comes to this building, if Mr. Crane or company counsel tries to meet her alone, call me." Denise took the card but did not soften. "Are we calling police?" "Eventually, yes. But if we go too soon with only suspicion, Nathaniel will bury it under attorneys and procedure. We need the original transport logs, camera records, and confirmation of where that crate went." "Victor Lorne," Annie said. Samuel's brows drew together. "You know that name?" "I read about him. He was a restorer before people started whispering that his restorations came back looking too profitable. He has worked privately for several collectors," Samuel said, "including friends of Nathaniel Whitmore." Annie felt the room tilt a little. The fear had shape now. It was not a shadow. It had names, schedules, access codes, and money. Samuel looked toward the stairwell before speaking again. Mr. Whitmore is being moved to a private room. Nathaniel and Vivian are controlling access. I may have limited time to reach him directly. Until then, Miss Carter, do not return to Whitmore and Vale. They already told me to collect my things. You collected them? Yes. Did they see your notebook? No. Keep it hidden. Denise lifted the card. And what do we do about her termination? About these legal texts? You keep every message. Do not reply. Do not delete anything. I will have an attorney who is not connected to the Whitmore family review them quietly. Annie gave a tired, bitter laugh. Quietly. Everything in this story keeps happening quietly. Until it ruins me out loud. Samuel looked at her for a long second. Then we will have to make the truth louder. Before anyone could answer, footsteps sounded on the stairs below. Samuel turned his head. Denise pushed Annie gently behind the doorframe. A young delivery man appeared, carrying a plastic bag from the corner diner. He stopped when he saw 3 people staring at him. Ooh, Carter. Denise exhaled. That's us. Order for Denise. 2 coffees, grits, toast, side of bacon. Denise frowned. I didn't order breakfast. The young man checked the receipt, paid online. Samuel took 1 step forward. May I see the receipt? The delivery man shrugged and handed it over. Samuel read it, then passed it to Denise. No customer name, no phone number. At the bottom, under special instructions, someone had typed, "Enjoy your last quiet morning." Annie's stomach turned cold. Denise looked at Samuel. You still want to wait before police? Samuel's face had gone hard in a way Annie had not seen before. No, that changes things. The delivery man stepped back. I don't know anything about that. I just deliver. I know, Denise said, softer than her face looked. Go on, baby. He left quickly. Samuel took out his phone. I'm calling someone I trust. Detective Laura Bennett. She handles financial crimes, but she understands intimidation. Mrs. Carter, may I photograph that receipt? Denise held it out. Photograph it, copy it, frame it if it helps. Annie sank into the kitchen chair. They know where I live. Denise stood behind her and placed both hands on her shoulders. Then they know where your mother lives too. Let them remember that. Mama, I didn't say I could fight money. I said I can answer a door. Samuel was already speaking quietly into the phone in the hallway. Annie caught pieces. Witness intimidation, possible art fraud, medical endangerment, forged consignment asset, young woman at risk. His voice stayed calm, but each word landed like a lock turning. Denise leaned closer to Annie. Listen to me. Fear is going to tell you to apologize for being alive in the wrong room. Don't you dare. Annie looked at the cold toast on the table, the oatmeal softening in the bowl, the legal messages on her phone, and the delivery receipt now lying beside Samuel's card. Yesterday, she had worried about bus fare and whether Mr. Crane would cut her hours. Now people with family offices and private cars knew her address. I don't want to be brave, she said. I know. I just wanted to restore paintings. Denise touched her hair. Maybe God started you with paintings because he knew you'd need practice uncovering what people tried to hide. Samuel returned to the doorway. Detective Bennett will meet us, but not here. Public place. Daylight. She suggested Street Marks Church on Fulton, if you know it. Annie looked up. My grandmother worked on the murals there. I know, Denise said. Your grandma trusted that place. Samuel nodded. Mr. Brooks can meet us there as well. Bring the notebook, the photos, and every message you received. Denise reached for her coat. We're going with her. Samuel did not argue. Of course. Annie stood, then stopped. What about Mr. Whitmore? Samuel's expression changed just enough to show the worry beneath the discipline. I will try to reach him again after we speak to Detective Bennett. What if Nathaniel keeps him from you? Then Mr. Whitmore and I will do what we have done for 26 years. Denise raised an eyebrow. Which is? Samuel slipped his phone into his coat pocket. Find another door. 20 minutes later, Annie left the apartment between her mother and Samuel. She wore a plain sweater under her old coat, her backpack tight against both shoulders, her notebook wrapped in a grocery bag to keep it safe from the light rain beginning to fall. Denise locked the door twice, then checked it once more because mothers trusted locks only after testing them. On the sidewalk, Brooklyn had fully woken. Buses sighed at the curb. A man sold coffee from a cart. Two older women from the building watched from the stoop, not pretending they were not watching. "You all right, Annie?" one called. Annie opened her mouth, but Denise answered first. "She will be." The woman nodded as if that was enough for now. As they walked toward the subway, Annie looked at the gray morning reflected in store windows and felt the city around her. Tired, busy, unfair, alive. She did not feel ready. She did not feel safe. But for the first time since Julian's hand had closed around her wrist beneath the fallen rack, she was not carrying the truth alone. At Street Marks, the old wooden doors stood open. Inside, the church smelled faintly of candle wax, floor polish, and damp coats. Sunlight filtered through stained glass and fell across the faded wall murals Annie's grandmother had once cleaned with cotton swabs and patience. Elijah Brooks was already there, sitting in the third pew with his security cap in his hands. Beside him stood a woman in a dark coat, hair pulled back, badge clipped at her belt. Her eyes were steady, direct, and tired, in the way honest people got tired, when lies had too much money. "Annie Carter?" she asked. Annie nodded. "I'm Detective Laura Bennett. I hear you saw a painting that wasn't supposed to change." Annie gripped the notebook through the grocery bag. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "And I think someone tried to kill a man to keep it changed." Detective Bennett did not look shocked. She only opened her notebook. "Then start at the beginning," she said. "And don't leave out the parts they made you feel ashamed to say." Detective Laura Bennett listened without interrupting. That was the first thing Annie noticed. Most adults interrupted when they thought they already understood. Mr. Crane had interrupted to correct her. Nathaniel had interrupted to accuse her. Vivian had interrupted because silence from someone like Annie made her impatient. But Detective Bennett stood beneath the old church mural with her notebook open and let Annie speak until the whole terrible night had a shape. Annie told her about Julian under the rack, the missing inhaler, the herbal tea, the ambulance, Nathaniel and Vivian at the hospital. Crane's lie, the fake portrait, the altered backing, the text from Crane, the legal threat, and the breakfast delivery note. When her voice shook, Denise reached for her hand. When she forgot a detail, Elijah supplied the time from his pocket notebook. Samuel added only what he had verified through Julian's brief words and private records. When Annie finished, Detective Bennett looked at the notes for a long moment. "All right," she said, "here is what I know. You may be a witness to 3 separate things: an assault or attempted medical endangerment against Julian Whitmore, a high-value art fraud, and witness intimidation. What I do not have yet is enough to walk into Whitmore and Vale with a warrant and take the place apart." Denise frowned. "They sent food to my house with a threat on the receipt." "They did," Bennett said, "and I'm treating it seriously. But rich people threaten through distance. They'll say it was a prank, a delivery error, someone online. I need a line that connects the threat to the people who benefit." Annie looked down at her notebook. "So nothing happens?" "That is not what I said." Bennett's voice stayed level, but it sharpened enough to make Annie look up. "Cases do not begin with everything. They begin with one thing that holds, then another, then the lie gets too heavy to carry." Elijah gave a low hum. "That sounds like police talk for patience." "It is," Bennett said, "and I know patience feels insulting when somebody is already stepping on your neck." Denise looked at her then with a little less suspicion. Samuel stood near the end of the pew, hands folded over the handle of his umbrella. "Detective, what do you need first?" "The original logs, not summaries, access records, camera maintenance alerts, heat lamp system activity, transport crate sign-outs, and employee termination documents. If Miss Brooks has handwritten notes, I want copies, not the original yet. Originals stay safe." Elijah patted his jacket pocket. "I don't let originals leave my person unless the Lord asks personally." Bennett almost smiled. "Good policy." Annie opened her phone and handed it over after Bennett asked permission. The detective photographed the messages, the delivery receipt, and the pictures Annie had taken of the portrait. She zoomed in on the back lining and the crack near the woman's blue sleeve. "You're certain this is different from before?" Annie hesitated. "I'm certain of what I saw. I know how that sounds. It sounds like a witness describing observations. Don't apologize for being precise." Annie swallowed. "The old backing had hand stitches. Uneven ones. The new one is too clean, and the blue is wrong." "Wrong how?" "It doesn't sit in the canvas. It sits on top of it, like somebody taught it to look old. Bennett wrote that down. That's useful. To you? To anyone with sense. For the first time that morning, Annie felt something besides fear. Not relief. Not yet. But the smallest space opening inside her chest. Bennett turned to Samuel. Can Julian Whitmore give a formal statement? He is conscious on and off. Nathaniel and Vivian are controlling access through hospital administration. They are using medical rest as the excuse. That tracks, Bennett said. I'll speak to the hospital through official channels, but I won't announce the full direction yet. If Nathaniel thinks this is only about workplace negligence, he may get careless. Samuel nodded. Mr. Whitmore will cooperate if I can reach him. Then reach him? Denise crossed her arms. And while all these men get careless, what happens to my daughter? Bennett looked at Annie. You do not go anywhere alone for now. You do not meet company counsel without representation. You do not answer unknown calls. If someone comes to your building, you call 911 and then me. If a reporter contacts you, no comment. If Mr. Crane asks you to return company property, Samuel arranges it through counsel or police. Annie gave a weak laugh. I don't have counsel. Samuel said, You do now. She looked at him quickly. No, I can't pay. I did not say you would. I don't want charity. Good, Samuel said. Then call it protection for a witness Mr. Whitmore's own family tried to discredit. Denise pointed one finger at him. Now that is a better word than charity. Bennett closed her notebook. There's one more thing. Annie, you are going to be tempted to prove everything at once. Don't. That is how frightened witnesses make mistakes. You saw what you saw. You heard what you heard. Let the evidence catch up. Annie nodded, but inside she felt the pull of the portrait. It sat somewhere under linen, false and quiet, waiting to be sold. After the meeting, Samuel offered to call a car, but Denise refused. We'll take the bus. I need to see who follows. Samuel did not argue. Then I will walk behind you to the stop. Outside, the rain had thinned to a mist. Fulton Street was awake now, with church ladies carrying tote bags, a man unloading bread trays, and kids in hoodies dragging themselves toward school. Life looked ordinary in a way that made Annie angry. How could the world keep selling coffee when a man had almost died and everyone was pretending the truth was paperwork? At the bus stop, Elijah stood beside Annie while Denise spoke quietly with Bennett near the curb. Samuel was on the phone, his voice low. You holding up? Elijah asked. No. Good. Means you're honest. Annie looked at him. Were you scared last night? Still am. You don't look it. I'm 67. Face got tired of reporting every weather change. That made Annie smile for half a second. Elijah leaned closer. Crane called me twice after you left. Wanted to know whether you went near the portrait. What did you say? I said I was helping paramedics and didn't see much. Is that a lie? That is a narrow hallway between truth and survival. Annie looked toward the street. I hate this. You should. I hate that we have to be careful when they're the ones who did wrong. Elijah nodded. That's how power works. It makes innocence walk slow while guilt takes the elevator. The bus came, sighing at the curb. Denise climbed on first, then Annie. Elijah stayed back. You're not coming? I have to go back. Annie's eyes widened. To Whitmore and Vale? I still work there. And somebody needs to see what they try to clean before the official people arrive. That's dangerous. So is not knowing. Before she could answer, the bus driver called. Miss? You riding or holding a meeting? Denise pulled Annie gently by the sleeve. Elijah tipped 2 fingers to his cap as the doors closed. On the ride home, Annie watched Brooklyn slide past in wet colors. Denise sat close enough that their shoulders touched. Neither spoke for several blocks. Then Denise said, Your grandmother would have liked that, detective. Because she believed me? Because she knew when to listen and when to write things down. Annie rested her head against the window. Grandma would have been mad I used time from an office kitchen without asking. Denise snorted. Your grandma stole communion flowers once to make a poultice for Mrs. Jenkins' ankle. She would have survived. The laugh that came out of Annie was small and tired, but real. Then it faded. What if they sell the painting before anyone stops them? Denise looked ahead. Then you keep enough truth alive to follow it. At the apartment, the hallway smelled of bleach and fried onions. Their neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, opened her door just as they reached the stairs. "Denise," she said, pretending not to stare at Annie's swollen eyes. "I made too much chicken and rice." "You take some later." Denise nodded. "Thank you." Mrs. Alvarez looked at Annie. "You need anything, you knock." "I don't care what time," Annie managed. "Thank you, ma'am." Inside, the apartment felt different. Not safer exactly, but less lonely. Denise put the kettle on again. Annie sat at the table and made 3 copies of everything. Photos, notes, messages, names, times. She emailed them to herself, Elijah, and the new address Samuel had given her. Then she wrote the whole night from memory, beginning with the crash and ending with Detective Bennett at the church. By noon, exhaustion hit her so hard her hands stopped moving. Denise put a blanket around her shoulders. "Sleep for an hour." "I can't." "Then close your eyes and argue with God quietly." Annie almost obeyed, but her phone buzzed. This time it was not unknown. It was an email from the apprenticeship program at the Metropolitan Conservation Workshop, the one Annie had dreamed about for 2 years. She had applied 3 months earlier with photos of practice restorations, letters from 2 church elders, and a personal essay about her grandmother teaching her to clean smoke damage from a mural of Mary holding Jesus. Her hands shook as she opened it. "Dear Miss Carter, after further review, we regret to inform you that your application is no longer under consideration. Due to concerns regarding recent professional conduct, we are unable to proceed at this time." Annie read the sentence once, then again. Denise saw her face. "What is it?" Annie turned the phone around. Denise's eyes moved across the screen. The anger came slowly, not loud, but deep. They reached them. Annie nodded. The apprenticeship had been more than a program. It had been a doorway, a real one that did not lead through a service entrance. She placed the phone on the table with care because if she held it any longer, she might throw it. "They don't just want me quiet," she said. "They want me erased." Denise sat across from her. "Then we make copies of you too." Annie looked up. "Your work, your sketches, your church projects, your notes, everything that proves who you were before they started lying." Annie took a breath, then pulled a plastic storage bin from beneath the sink. Inside were old sketchbooks, photos of repaired church panels, sample boards, letters, and the first pair of white cotton gloves her grandmother had bought her from a museum gift shop. She touched the gloves. Grandma Rose had told her, "These don't mean the art is too good for your hands. They mean your hands are worth preparing." Annie folded them carefully and set them beside the notebook. Across town, in a private hospital room, Julian Whitmore opened his eyes to the sound of his son speaking softly near the door. "She's handled," Nathaniel said. "The girl won't be a problem." Julian kept his breathing shallow and his eyes half closed. Vivian answered, "Make sure of it. If she talks about the portrait, everything falls apart." Julian's fingers tightened under the blanket. He remembered dust. He remembered no inhaler. He remembered a young voice telling him not to panic. And now, at last, he remembered enough to be afraid for someone other than himself. Julian Whitmore kept his eyes half closed while Nathaniel and Vivian spoke near the door. Their voices low enough for a sick room but not low enough for a man who had spent his life listening to people lie across polished tables. "She's handled," Nathaniel said. "The girl won't be a problem," Vivian answered. "Make sure of it. If she talks about the portrait, everything falls apart." The portrait. Julian let the words settle inside him. It did not come all at once. Memory never did after pain. It returned in broken pieces. The examination lamp, the back of the frame, the strip of old lining, the wrong scent beneath the varnish, Nathaniel watching him too closely. Then the storage room, dust, weight on his chest, his hand searching for the inhaler that was always in his inside pocket. It had not been there. His throat tightened even with oxygen resting beneath his nose. Nathaniel stepped closer to the bed. Julian forced his hand to relax under the blanket. "He's asleep," Vivian whispered. "He'll be kept that way if the doctors know what's good for him," Nathaniel said. Julian heard paper rustle. "What about Samuel?" "I told security no visitors without family approval. Samuel Price has worked for your father longer than I've been married to you. And he still works for us." Vivian gave a small laugh. "No, darling. Samuel works for Julian. That has always been the problem." The door opened and closed a moment later. Their footsteps faded down the hallway. Julian waited 10 seconds, then 20. Only when the room settled into the steady beeping of machines did he open his eyes fully. The ceiling above him was white, expensive, and useless. He turned his head slowly. Pain moved through his ribs, dull and deep. The doctors had told him he was lucky. Lucky that the rack had not crushed his chest completely. Lucky that help had come fast. Lucky that some young employee had known enough to sit him upright, keep him calm, and help him breathe until the ambulance arrived. Lucky, he almost laughed, but the attempt turned into a cough that burned. A nurse came in at once. "Mr. Whitmore?" He lifted a hand to show he was awake. "Water." She held a cup with a straw to his lips. Small sip. He drank, then waited until the cough passed. "My son gave instructions about visitors?" The nurse's face became careful. Hospital staff were trained to be careful around wealthy families. Julian had seen that look before from across boardroom tables and charity galas. It was the face people wore when rules met money. "Your family requested reduced stimulation," she said. "You need rest." "My family requested control." She did not answer. "What is your name?" Julian asked. "Maria." "Maria, I need my phone." "Sir, you're still under observation. My phone will not worsen my lungs. It may raise your stress. I assure you not having it is doing that already." She hesitated. Julian softened his voice. "Please." That word had bought less in his life than money had, but it had cost him more to say. Maria opened the drawer beside the bed and handed him his phone. 2 minutes. "If your numbers spike, I'm taking it back." "Fair." His fingers were unsteady. He hated that. He had authenticated damaged canvases under bad light with steadier hands. Now he struggled to unlock a phone. He called Samuel. The first call failed. He tried again. On the third ring, Samuel Price answered. "Mr. Whitmore?" Julian closed his eyes. Relief moved through him so quickly it embarrassed him. "Samuel, thank God. Where are you?" "Private room. Street Bartholomew." "Nathaniel is limiting access." "I assumed as much. I am already with Miss Carter." Julian's eyes opened. "She safe?" "For the moment. Frightened, fired, threatened, and being smeared, but safe." Julian turned his face away from the door. "They told me she was thanked and paid. They lied. I knew." "Yes, sir." Julian swallowed. His throat still felt scraped raw. "I remember the portrait." Samuel's voice changed. "What do you remember?" "The back. The lining was wrong. Too clean. And the varnish had a modern scent. I was going to pull the old records then." He stopped. "The rack. The missing inhaler. The sudden crash. Someone wanted me quiet before the auction." "We believe so." "Annie saw it?" "She did. She photographed differences and sent copies. Mr. Brooks has notes showing a 15-minute heat lamp shutdown, camera interruption, and a private crate movement." "Elia Brooks?" "Yes." Julian let out a slow breath. "Good man. Underpaid for years. Most good men are." Despite the pain, Julian almost smiled. Then he heard movement outside the room and lowered his voice. Nathaniel mentioned the girl. "Vivian said if she talks about the portrait, everything falls apart." "Can you say that formally?" "Not yet. They are watching. Detective Bennett is involved." "Good. Tell her I will give a statement as soon as you get me out from under my son's hand. I'm working on another door." "Samuel." "Yes, sir?" "Find my medical bag." My inhaler was in my inside coat pocket before I entered the West storage room. It did not vanish by accident. I'll trace the personal effects record and the original portrait. If they have not moved it out yet, they will. Victor Lorne may be connected. Julian went still. "Lorne? That little butcher with silk gloves? So you know him." "I refused to certify 2 works he touched 10 years ago. Nathaniel knew that." The door handle moved. Julian whispered, "I have to go." "Stay alive," Samuel said. "I intend to be inconvenient." He ended the call and slid the phone under the blanket just as Nathaniel entered with Vivian behind him. Nathaniel's eyes went first to Julian's face, then to the monitor, then to the bedside drawer. "You're awake," he said. "Observant." Vivian smiled tightly. "We were worried." "Were you?" Nathaniel came closer. "Father, you suffered a serious trauma. The doctor says your memory may be unreliable for a while." How useful? His son paused. Excuse me? Memory being unreliable. Useful to someone. Vivian's smile thinned. Julian, this is not the time for suspicion. No? I find hospital beds excellent for suspicion. One has so little else to do. Nathaniel pulled a chair to the bedside. You need rest, not stress. I've already handled the employee situation. The employee has a name. Annie Carter, Nathaniel said too quickly. Julian watched him. Yes. She was somewhere she should not have been. Crane is reviewing how she gained access. She gained access by hearing me fall. That is her version. It is mine as well. Nathaniel looked at Vivian. She took a step forward, her voice soft. You were barely conscious, Julian. People in distress can attach themselves emotionally to whoever happens to be nearby. Julian turned his eyes to her, and people with guilt often explain compassion as manipulation. Color rose faintly in her cheeks. Nathaniel leaned in. You are not thinking clearly. That girl may have touched the portrait. She may have caused the rack collapse. Julian's breathing changed. The monitor caught it, beeping faster. Maria appeared at the door. Mr. Whitmore needs calm. Julian lifted one hand. Then remove the source. Nathaniel stiffened. Father, I want Samuel Price. He isn't family. No, Julian said. He is useful. Vivian's voice hardened under the polish. After everything Nathaniel has done to protect you, protect me from whom? The girl who saved my breath, or the son who keeps trying to spend it for me? Silence struck the room. Nathaniel's face changed. Just for a second. The sun disappeared. Something colder looked out. You should be careful, he said. Maria stepped closer. Sir, I need you to leave. Nathaniel recovered his expression. Of course, we only want what's best for him. Julian looked at the nurse. No family visitors without my direct consent. Put it in the chart. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. You don't mean that. I have authenticated forgeries with more convincing distress than yours. Leave. Vivian turned first. Nathaniel followed, but at the door he looked back. You are making a mistake, Julian answered. Then it will be one of the few I make for myself. When they were gone, Maria checked the monitor. You shouldn't provoke them. I did not provoke them. I identified them. She gave him a look that reminded him of women who had raised children, managed doctors, and outlived fools. There a difference? Sometimes. She adjusted his oxygen. Your Samuel Price is downstairs. Security has been refusing him. Please call hospital administration. Mr. Whitmore, that will become complicated. Julian looked toward the closed door. He thought of Annie Carter in a gray uniform, her hands steady under dust and fear. He thought of his son using her poverty as a weapon. He thought of a masterpiece stolen and a girl being turned into evidence. Maria, he said, complicated has already arrived. 15 minutes later, Samuel entered the room with Detective Bennett beside him. Samuel's coat was damp from rain, his expression controlled, but Julian knew him too well. Anger lived in the small details, the tightness around the eyes, the exact placement of his briefcase, the way he did not ask how Julian felt before looking at the door. Detective Bennett showed her badge. Mr. Whitmore, I need to know whether you're well enough to answer questions. Julian shifted against the pillow. Pain answered, but so did purpose. I am not well enough, he said, but I am angry enough. Bennett opened her notebook. That will do for now. Samuel moved closer. Miss Carter is cooperating. Is she protected? We are taking steps. Take more. Bennett looked at him. Mr. Whitmore, did someone intentionally remove your inhaler? Julian closed his eyes and returned to the storage room, his coat, his pocket, the missing weight. Nathaniel nearby earlier, offering to help him with the frame. Vivian distracting him with a question about auction seating. Crane at the door. He opened his eyes. I cannot prove who took it yet, he said. But I can tell you this. It was in my pocket when I entered that building, and gone when I was dying under that rack. And the painting? The portrait scheduled for auction is not the original I examined. Samuel's face tightened, though he did not interrupt. Bennett wrote quickly, Who benefits from the substitution? Julian looked toward the door where his son had stood. My son, he said, and anyone foolish enough to believe blood makes fraud less ugly. The words cost him breath, but he did not regret them. For the first time since waking, Julian felt the room change. Not safe. Not yet. But no longer sealed. Somewhere in Brooklyn, Annie Carter had spoken. Now he had too. Samuel Price did not stay long in Julian Whitmore's hospital room. He knew better than to mistake a door opened once for a door secured. Nathaniel would learn soon enough that hospital administration had changed the visitor list, and Vivian would not forgive the embarrassment of being turned away by a nurse with a clipboard. People like them smiled in public and punished in private. Before Samuel left, Julian caught his sleeve. "Annie," Julian said, "I'll see her." Not as a messenger carrying gratitude. Samuel looked at him. Then how? As a man carrying a debt. Julian's voice was weak, but his eyes were clear now. "Tell her I believed her before I had proof. She deserves to know that." Samuel nodded. "And if she refuses to speak with me, then you respect it, but make sure she is safe." Detective Bennett closed her notebook. "Mr. Whitmore, safe is going to require more than respect. Your son is already moving faster than we are." Julian turned to her. "Then move faster." Bennett did not blink. "That is easier to say from a hospital bed than to do inside a court system." A tired smile touched Julian's mouth. "Detective, I have spent 30 years watching men use systems as hiding places. I am asking you to make this one inconvenient." Bennett studied him for half a second, then put her notebook away. "That I can attempt." By early afternoon, Samuel was back in Brooklyn, walking beside Detective Bennett toward St. Mark's Church. The rain had stopped, leaving the sidewalk dark and slick. A school bus sighed at the corner. Two older men sat outside a barber shop with paper coffee cups, watching the street the way older men in city neighborhoods often did, missing nothing and pretending to be bored. Inside the church basement, Annie sat at a folding table beneath fluorescent lights that buzzed softly. Denise was beside her, sorting old photographs and sample boards into piles. Elijah Brooks stood near the coffee urn with his cap in his hands. He had come straight from Whitmore and Vale, and the weariness on his face had sharpened into concern. Annie looked up when Samuel entered. For 1 second, the room held its breath. "Is he alive?" she asked. Samuel stopped across from her, not too close. "Yes, he is awake, weak, but clear." Annie's shoulders dropped just a little. She tried to hide the relief, but failed. "He remembers you," Samuel said. "He asked me to tell you he believed you before he had proof." Denise glanced at Annie. Annie looked down at the table. "That doesn't sound like something a billionaire says often," Denise said. "It is not," Samuel replied. Detective Bennett pulled out a chair and sat. "We need to compare what we have. Mr. Brooks, you said you went back into Whitmore and Vale?" Elijah nodded. "Carefully. What did you find?" He took a folded sheet from his jacket. "Crane's been cleaning house. Not with a mop. Digitally. He requested access archive edits under incident review. That usually means somebody wants tomorrow's records to look different from yesterday's truth." Samuel's face tightened. "Can he delete the camera outage?" "Not cleanly. System keeps a maintenance shadow log. Most managers forget that." Annie leaned forward. "A what?" "A record of records being changed," Elijah said. "Like footprints left by a man sweeping footprints." Bennett held out her hand. "You copied it?" "I photographed the screen. Didn't print. Printer logs." Bennett's mouth twitched. "You've done this before. I've watched men blame janitors before." He handed her his phone. Bennett examined the images and wrote times beside her notes. The West Hall camera was placed in maintenance mode at 11:54 p.m. User credential H. Crane. Heat preservation system was manually shut down at 11:42. Same credential. Service elevator used at 11:48 under private transport authorization. Approval code N. Whitmore. Annie said quietly, "Nathaniel." Samuel set his briefcase on the table and opened it. Julian confirmed that the portrait scheduled for auction is not the original he examined. He also confirmed his inhaler was in his pocket when he arrived at the building. "Can he identify who removed it?" Bennett asked. "Not yet. Then we keep that as a medical endangerment line, not the center of the warrant. The painting will move us faster." Denise frowned. "Faster than someone almost killing him?" "Sadly, yes," Bennett said. "A multi-million-dollar fraud leaves financial trails. People get careless when they think paperwork is boring." Annie stared at the photos spread across the table. Her pictures looked small beside access logs, codes, and official statements. Small, but necessary. Samuel turned to her. "Miss Carter, I need you to walk us through the painting again, slowly, as if we know nothing." Annie gave him a skeptical look. Most people in your world don't like being spoken to like they know nothing. Most people in my world need it. Elijah gave a quiet chuckle near the coffee urn. Annie took the archival photo Samuel had obtained from Julian's private file and placed it beside her phone image. This is the original from earlier records. See the back edge? The lining is uneven. The hand stitching here isn't decorative. It's an old repair. Whoever did it used thread that darkened differently at the fold. That's hard to fake unless you have time. She moved to the second image. This is what's there now. Too clean. The stitches are regular. Machine regular. And the blue pigment on the dress is too bright under the varnish. It looks aged from the top, but the color underneath hasn't settled. Bennett wrote, "Could a defense expert argue restoration?" "Yes," Annie said, "but not if the backing changed without documentation, not if the crack pattern changed, not if the pigment doesn't match known age, and not if the original is somewhere else." "That last part would help," Bennett said. Samuel removed another paper from his folder. "Victor Lorne has a private storage account near Teterboro. It was accessed this morning by a driver connected to Nathaniel's shell company." Bennett looked up. "How did you get that?" "Julian pays me to know which doors open before people admit there are doors. I need legal source trails." "You'll have them." Denise looked between them. "While you all chase paper, what happens to Annie's name?" "Her apprenticeship rejected her this morning." Samuel looked at Annie. "Which program?" "Metropolitan Conservation Workshop," Annie said. She tried to sound detached and failed. "They said recent professional conduct." Samuel closed his eyes for half a second. "Vivian, you know that?" "I know her habits. She can ruin a reputation without appearing in the sentence." Bennett leaned back. "That can become part of a civil case, but right now we focus on criminal exposure." Annie's voice tightened. "Easy to say when it isn't your future getting erased." Bennett did not soften her face, but her voice changed. "You're right. It is easy to say. It is also the only way I know to build something that doesn't collapse when rich lawyers breathe on it." Annie looked away. Denise touched her arm. Samuel said, "Mr. Whitmore intends to correct the public record." Annie gave a small laugh. "After everyone has already believed the first lie?" "First lies travel fast," Elijah said. "Truth walks slower because it has to carry proof." No one spoke for a moment. Then a church door opened upstairs. Footsteps moved across the floorboards above them. Annie stiffened. Denise looked toward the stairwell. A woman called down, "Detective Bennett?" Bennett stood. "Here." A uniformed officer appeared at the basement doorway. "You asked for updates on Whitmore and Vale. Company counsel just filed a statement. They're claiming Miss Carter removed proprietary restoration notes and may have tampered with the portrait after the accident." Annie went cold. "What?" Denise stood so fast her chair scraped. "That is a lie." The officer looked uncomfortable. "They're requesting police assistance recovering company property." Bennett's face hardened. "Of course they are." Samuel turned to Annie. "What exactly did you take from the building?" "My backpack, my brushes, my notebook." "Your notebook," Bennett said. "Does it contain notes from your work there?" "It contains my notes. From books, from my grandmother, from practice pieces. Some sketches of paintings I studied while cleaning." Samuel looked grim. "They will claim those sketches are confidential. They were my practice." "I believe you. That does not mean they won't weaponize it." Annie gripped the edge of the table. "So now my own notebook makes me a thief?" Denise stepped closer to her. "No." Bennett came around the table and crouched slightly so Annie had to look at her. "Listen to me. This is why we met before they filed. We have your timeline, your photos, Mr. Brooks's notes, Mr. Whitmore's statement, and threatening messages. They are trying to get ahead of the facts. That means the facts are scaring them." Annie tried to breathe slowly. It felt like being back in the storage room, except this time the rack was made of paper. Samuel's phone buzzed. He read the screen, and his expression changed. "What?" Bennett asked. "Julian's access to his personal phone has been restricted again. Nathaniel filed a family concern request with hospital administration, claiming cognitive instability." Bennett cursed under her breath. Denise said, "That boy is locking his own father away." "Yes," Samuel said. "And if he succeeds, Julian's statement becomes easier to challenge." Annie looked at the old church mural above them. Mary's painted hands, cleaned years ago by Grandma Rose, were still cracked but visible. Her grandmother had never believed in throwing away damaged things just because someone rich preferred new ones. "What do we do?" Annie asked. Bennett answered first. "I seek an emergency preservation order for the records and painting." Samuel said. "I contact Julian's independent physician and estate attorney." Elijah said. "I go back and watch Crane." Denise looked at him. "You are too old to be sneaking around criminals." Elijah put on his cap. "Ma'am, I am exactly old enough. People stop looking at old men when they think all we carry is back pain." Annie almost smiled, but the fear stayed. Samuel gathered the documents. "Miss Carter, I need one more thing from you." She looked tired. "What?" "Permission to have a forensic art consultant review your observations under your name." Annie hesitated. "Under my name?" "Yes." "What if they laugh?" Samuel's voice was quiet. "Then they will do so on record, and later be embarrassed on record." Denise gave a short nod. "I like that." Annie looked at the notebook on the table. For months it had been the place where she put dreams too small to tell anyone. Now it had become evidence. She pushed it toward Samuel, but kept her hand on the cover. "This doesn't belong to Whitmore and Vale," she said. "No," Samuel replied. "It belongs to Annie Carter." She let go. By evening, Annie's name had reached places she had never been allowed to enter. An internal alert moved through galleries and restoration shops. A whisper followed it. "Young worker. Restricted access. Damaged trust. Possible theft." No one called Annie to ask. They only forwarded concern. In a private office across Manhattan, Vivian Whitmore read one such message and smiled. Nathaniel stood by the window, his phone pressed to his ear. "Yes," he said. "Keep the auction schedule. My father is confused, and the girl is being handled." He paused, listening. "No, do not move the painting again. That will look suspicious. We sell it fast, publicly, and then everyone has too much invested to admit they were fooled." Vivian looked up. "And Annie?" Nathaniel ended the call. "She is 18, he said, poor, fired, and already doubted. By the time she tells the truth, no one will want to be seen believing her." Vivian reached for her coat. "Then let's make sure she stays exactly that." Across the city, Annie sat at her mother's kitchen table with no job, no apprenticeship, and her notebook gone into Samuel's briefcase. Rain tapped against the window. Denise was making soup because grief, in her opinion, still had to eat. Annie's phone buzzed. An email appeared from an address she did not know. Attached was a formal cease and desist letter naming her in bold type. Below it, one sentence had been typed without signature. "Girls who reach above their place lose the hand." Annie stared at the words until they blurred. Then she took a screenshot and sent it to Detective Bennett. No reply, no argument, no fear given back to them, just proof. Annie did not sleep much that night. She lay on the narrow bed beside the window, listening to rain tick against the fire escape and the pipes knock inside the wall. Her mother had gone to bed after midnight, though Annie knew Denise was not sleeping either. Every few minutes the apartment made a small sound, and Annie wondered if it was the building settling or fear learning how to move quietly. The email sat in her phone like a poison needle. "Girls who reach above their place lose the hand." She had sent it to Detective Bennett without answering, just as she had been told. Then she had copied it to Samuel. Then she had put the phone face down on her blanket and tried not to imagine Vivian smiling while someone typed it. At 6:12 inches the morning, the phone buzzed. Annie grabbed it so fast her heart hurt. It was not Vivian, not Crane, not an unknown threat. It was Samuel. "Miss Carter, Detective Bennett has a court order in progress, but we may have less time than expected. Auction remains scheduled for tomorrow night. Can you meet at Street Marks by 9? Bring anything your grandmother taught you about testing varnish safely." Annie read the message 3 times. Tomorrow night. The fake portrait was not waiting for justice to catch up. It was being polished for sale. She got up, dressed quietly, and opened the plastic bin beneath her desk. Inside were old sketchbooks, sample boards, cotton swabs, a small magnifier, and a metal tin that had belonged to Grandma Rose. The tin smelled faintly of clove, paper, and old wood. Annie sat on the floor and lifted the lid. Inside were folded notes in her grandmother's handwriting. Recipes for cleaning smoke-darkened varnish. Warnings written in all caps. Never test the center first. Never trust shine. Old damage tells the truth if you don't bully it. At the bottom was a small cloth pouch with 2 glass vials wrapped in cotton. Annie touched them carefully. They were not magic. They were mild testing solutions used in old restoration work, the kind her grandmother had diluted almost to gentleness. Annie would never use them on a masterpiece without permission, but on a tiny hidden edge, under supervision, they could reveal whether a top layer was newly applied. Denise appeared at the bedroom door in her robe. "You're going back to the church?" "Yes." "You eat first." "Mama, the auction is tomorrow, and your stomach is this morning." Denise made toast and eggs while Annie packed the tin, her gloves, and copies of her notes. Neither of them said much. Some mornings did not need many words. Before Annie left, Denise handed her a folded paper towel with 2 slices of toast inside. "For the road." Annie almost smiled. "You know I'm 18, right?" I remember the day very clearly. At Street Marks, Samuel was already downstairs with Elijah Brooks and Detective Bennett. A second man stood near the table, short, gray-bearded, wearing a tweed jacket that had seen better decades. He held Annie's printed photos under a lamp and was examining them through a magnifier. Samuel introduced him. "Dr. Peter Alden, independent conservation consultant, retired from the Met. Julian trusts him." Dr. Alden looked up over his glasses. "You're Annie Carter?" "Yes, sir." He tapped the photo of the portrait's backing. "You noticed this without removing the frame?" "Yes, sir." "And the blue pigment?" "Yes." He grunted. "Good eye." Annie waited for the rest. The doubt, the warning that she was young, the polite dismissal. It did not come. Dr. Alden turned the photo toward Bennett. "The girl is right to be concerned. I can't authenticate from images, but the backing inconsistency is serious. If the archival file shows uneven hand repair and this current piece has machine regular stitching, someone owes an explanation." Detective Bennett wrote that down. "Would that support probable cause?" "It supports preservation of the work for examination. Whether it supports fraud depends on comparison to the original records." Samuel opened a folder. "I have those." Dr. Alden looked at the papers, then at Samuel. "How did you get Julian's private archives?" "Julian owns them." "Does Nathaniel know you have them?" "No." "Good. I prefer my scandals with 1 idiot fewer." Elijah chuckled into his coffee. Annie opened Grandma Rose's tin and laid the vials on the table. "This is what I could bring. I know it's not enough to prove everything, but under UV and with a tiny edge test, it might show whether the surface layer is newer." Dr. Alden's eyes changed. "Who taught you?" "My grandmother. She restored church murals, not famous work, just work people prayed in front of. That is often the work that matters most." Annie did not expect that answer, and for a second she could not speak. Bennett pointed to the vials. "Could this damage the painting?" "If used badly, yes," Dr. Alden said. "If used correctly on a non-image edge under consent and documentation, minimal risk. But an auction house will fight it unless Julian authorizes the examination." Samuel said, "Julian will." "Can he appear in person?" Bennett asked. Samuel hesitated. "His doctor says travel is unwise." "Unwise isn't impossible," Elijah said. Samuel looked at him. "No, but dying in traffic would weaken our position." Despite herself, Annie gave a short laugh. It broke some of the tension in the room. Then Samuel's phone rang. He stepped aside, listened, and his face went still. "What happened?" Bennett asked. Samuel ended the call. "Nathaniel has petitioned to move Julian to a private recovery facility outside the city this afternoon." Annie's stomach dropped. "He's taking him away." "Trying to," Samuel said. Bennett stood. "On what grounds?" "Family Medical Authority. Stress, press exposure, cognitive confusion. Convenient. Very." Annie looked at the table, at the photos and notes. All of it suddenly too slow. "If Mr. Whitmore leaves the city, the auction goes ahead." Samuel nodded. "And if the fake sells publicly, every buyer, insurer, and institution involved will have reason to protect the sale instead of question it." Dr. Alden removed his glasses. "Nothing makes a fake harder to expose than respectable people who already paid for it." Detective Bennett closed her notebook. "Then we stop the move." "How?" Annie asked. "With Julian's own statement. If we can get one recorded under proper conditions. Samuel, call the physician. I'll call the hospital legal office. Elijah, I need a signed copy of your notes today. Elijah nodded. Done. Bennett looked at Annie. You stay reachable. Do not go near Whitmore and Vale. Annie almost answered, but her phone buzzed in her hand. Unknown number. Everyone saw her face change. Bennett held out her hand. May I? Annie gave her the phone. The detective put it on speaker but said nothing. A woman's voice came through, soft and polished. Annie Carter, I hope you understand that stubbornness is not the same as dignity. Vivian. Denise was not there to steady her, so Annie gripped the edge of the table. Bennett's eyes sharpened, but she motioned for Annie not to speak. Vivian continued. You have already lost your job. I heard the apprenticeship was unfortunate as well. These things happen when young women become confused about their position. Annie's throat burned. Vivian sighed lightly. If you continue, every door in this city will close before you touch the handle. Restoration is a small world, Annie. Smaller for girls without names. Bennett silently tapped the recording button on her own phone. Annie looked at Samuel. He gave the smallest nod. Not permission. Support. Annie spoke carefully. Mrs. Whitmore, why are you calling me? To help you? No. Why are you really calling me? There was a pause. Then Vivian's voice cooled. Because I dislike mess, and you are becoming one. Annie felt fear, but beneath it something steadier had begun to stand. I didn't switch that painting, she said. No one said you did. You did. At the hospital. People say many things in distress. Your husband said I hid Mr. Whitmore's inhaler. Did you? The question landed like a slap. Annie's voice shook, but did not break. No, and you know that. Vivian laughed once, softly. Be careful, child. Knowing and proving are different rooms. You may not be allowed into either. The call ended. For a moment, no one moved. Then Detective Bennett saved the recording and looked at Annie. That was useful. Annie stared at her. She just threatened me. Yes, Bennett said. And this time she forgot to hide behind a lawyer. Samuel's phone buzzed again. He read the message and looked at Annie. Julian's physician agreed to block the transfer pending evaluation. He also agreed to document that Julian is competent to make visitor decisions. Elijah exhaled. Old man still in the fight. Samuel's mouth tightened. Barely. But yes. Dr. Alden gathered the images into a neat stack. If you get me into that auction room, I can support the technical challenge. But the first voice must be Julian's. The second may need to be hers. Everyone looked at Annie. She felt suddenly very young. I'm not an expert. Dr. Alden looked at her over the rims of his glasses. Neither was the first person who noticed the Emperor was naked. Bennett said, We are not asking you to perform. We are asking you to say what you saw. Annie looked down at Grandma Rose's tin. She remembered the white gloves, the church murals, the way her grandmother had cleaned 1 inch at a time, never rushing truth out of hiding. What if my voice shakes? Annie asked. Elijah answered first. Then let it shake. A shaking voice can still tell the truth. By late afternoon, the plan had a shape. Julian would appear at the auction if his doctor allowed even limited transport. Samuel would secure his authorization to examine the painting. Dr. Alden would stand as an independent expert. Bennett would coordinate with financial crimes and customs, tracking Victor Lorne and the possible movement of the original. Elijah would keep watching Crane from inside as long as he safely could. Annie would bring the notes, the photos, the gloves, and the small tin. When the meeting ended, Samuel offered her a ride home. This time Annie accepted. Pride had limits. So did fear. In the back of the car, she looked out at Manhattan rising across the river. Tall and bright and full of locked rooms. Somewhere in that city, Nathaniel and Vivian believed money could still make truth kneel. Annie held Grandma Rose's tin in her lap with both hands. The tin was small, but so was a match before it found dry wood. Samuel's car dropped Annie and Denise at their building just after dusk. The rain had stopped, but the street still held its shine, reflecting deli lights, brake lights, and the pale glow from apartment windows above. Annie carried Grandma Rose's tin against her chest the way other girls might have carried a purse to a dance. Denise walked beside her without speaking. Her silence meant she was thinking 3 moves ahead. At the front step, Mrs. Alvarez from the first floor opened the lobby door before they reached it. She held a foil-covered plate in one hand. Chicken and rice, she said. You take it. Don't argue. Denise accepted the plate. You feeding us or watching us? Both. Mrs. Alvarez looked at Annie. Two men in suits came by earlier. Said they were from an insurance office. Asked whether you lived here. Annie went still. Denise's face hardened. What did you tell them? I told them half the building named Carter and none of us liked insurance. Mrs. Alvarez sniffed. Then Mr. Green from 2B came downstairs with his cane and asked if they needed help finding the sidewalk. Despite the fear, Annie felt warmth move through her. Thank you. Mrs. Alvarez waved that away. You just keep your phone charged, and don't open the door unless your mama says so. Inside, Denise locked the door and placed the chicken and rice on the stove. Eat. Annie set the tin on the kitchen table. I can't. You can be scared and chew at the same time. Annie sat because her legs were tired of pretending. Her phone lay beside the plate. Face up. Silent for once. That silence made her nervous. Threats had a rhythm now. When none came, she wondered what was being prepared. Denise watched her push rice around with a fork. Tomorrow night, you walk into that auction house? If Julian can get there. And if he can't, Annie looked at Grandma Rose's tin. Then I don't know. Denise sat across from her. Yes, you do. No, Mama. Without him, they'll say I'm crazy. They'll say I'm angry because I got fired. They'll say I'm trying to ruin a sale I don't understand. They'll say that anyway. Annie looked up. Denise's voice was calm. People who need you small don't wait for facts. They start with the ending they want and dress it up as reason. Annie swallowed. I'm tired. I know. I'm tired of being careful. Tired of proving I'm not what they call me. Tired of walking into rooms already guilty. Denise reached across the table and touched the back of her hand. Then tomorrow, don't walk in to beg them to believe you. Walk in to make lying harder. A knock came at the door. Both women froze. It came again, polite. 3 taps. Denise rose slowly and went to the peephole. Who is it? A man answered. Counsel for Whitmore and Vale. We need to speak with Annie Carter. Denise did not open the door. No. You don't. Ma'am, this concerns company property and a confidential incident. Refusal to cooperate may create legal consequences. Annie stood, heart hammering. Denise lifted one hand, warning her to stay back. My daughter is represented, Denise said. There was a pause outside. By whom? By people who know longer words than I do. Leave your card. Mrs. Carter, this will go easier if... Denise cut in. Sir, I raised a black child in America. Do not stand in my hallway and explain easier to me. Silence. Then paper slid under the door. Footsteps retreated. Denise waited until they faded before picking up the envelope with a dish towel. She laid it on the table. Annie stared at the thick cream paper, the embossed firm name, the kind of envelope that looked expensive enough to be believed. Inside was a formal demand. Return all company property. Cease defamatory statements. Surrender any unauthorized photographs or notes taken inside Whitmore and Vale, and appear for an internal interview the next morning. At the bottom, handwritten in blue ink, was a time and address. 10 a.m., Whitmore Legal Offices, Midtown. Annie's mouth went dry. They want me alone. Denise picked up her phone. They can want Christmas in July. Samuel answered on the second ring. Denise read the letter aloud. He listened without interrupting. No, he said when she finished. She does not attend alone. She does not attend tomorrow morning. Send me a photo. They came to the door, Annie said, leaning toward the phone. Samuel's voice sharpened. Did they identify themselves by name? No, just counsel. Good. That was sloppy. It didn't feel sloppy. To you, no. To a judge, possibly. Denise took pictures of every page and sent them. Samuel promised to forward them to Detective Bennett and the attorney he had contacted. After the call ended, Annie looked at the envelope again. It had changed the room. The kitchen no longer felt small and safe. It felt reachable. She slept in pieces that night, waking before every dream could form. The next morning, Samuel arrived with an attorney named Marjorie Bell, a woman in her 60s with cropped gray hair, a navy suit, and the kind of purse that looked capable of holding either legal briefs or emergency snacks. She greeted Denise first, then Annie. Miss Carter, I represent you for today's purposes and any future purposes you agree to. You do not speak to Whitmore Council without me. You do not sign anything without me. You do not apologize for facts. Understood? Annie nodded. Yes, ma'am. Marjorie sat at the kitchen table and read the letter. Bullying dressed as stationery. Denise gave her the first real approving look she had given any stranger all week. I said something similar with fewer legal fees. Marjorie smiled. I'm sure yours was better. Instead of going to the demanded meeting, Marjorie called the law firm on speaker. Samuel stood by the window. Annie sat stiffly beside her mother. A young male attorney answered. Marjorie introduced herself and asked who authorized direct contact with a represented witness in an active police inquiry. The man's confidence thinned. We were unaware Miss Carter had retained counsel. You became aware when her mother told your unidentified representatives at the door. Send all communication to me. Any further unannounced visit will be treated as harassment. We have concerns that Miss Carter removed proprietary materials. She removed her personal belongings after being told to collect them. If your client claims otherwise, preserve all security footage immediately. Do not edit, delete, summarize, or misplace it. I hope that word was clear. The man said they would respond in writing. Marjorie ended the call and looked at Annie. They expected scared. They got documented. For the first time that day, Annie breathed, but the relief did not last. At noon, Denise's phone rang. She listened for less than 10 seconds before her face changed. Who gave you that information? Another pause. No, my daughter is not behind on rent. And no, I will not discuss this over the phone. She hung up. Annie already knew. The landlord? Denise nodded. Says he received a complaint about illegal business activity in the unit. Says there may be a lease review. Annie pushed back from the table. They're going after the apartment now. Marjorie wrote it down. Date, time, caller. We add it. Annie laughed once, sharp and humorless. We add it. We add the job, the apprenticeship, the legal letters, the apartment. How much gets added before something stops them? No one answered quickly enough. She grabbed her coat. Denise stood. Where are you going? To Valk. No. I need air. Samuel stepped toward the door. I'll go with you. Annie wanted to refuse, but she saw Denise's face and swallowed the pride. Fine. They walked 3 blocks to a small park, where older men played chess under a shelter, and mothers pushed strollers around puddles. Samuel kept a respectful distance. Annie stood by the fence, watching children chase each other across wet pavement. I hate needing help, she said. Samuel looked at the park, not at her. Most honest people do. Do rich people? Rich people often call help strategy. Annie almost smiled. Then she said, Why did you stay with Julian so long? Samuel took time before answering. Because he was the first wealthy man I worked for who understood that loyalty was not obedience. I could tell him he was wrong and remain employed. Was he wrong often? Yes. That surprised a laugh out of her. Samuel's expression softened. He was wrong about Whitmore and Vale. He thought excellence protected the institution from cruelty. It did not. Excellence sometimes gives cruelty better lighting. Annie watched a little girl in pink rain boots jump into a puddle. Will he really say my name? Yes. In front of them? Yes. And if he gets too sick? Samuel's answer came quietly. Then I will say it until he can. Annie looked at him then. For all his formality, there was anger in him. Not loud anger, useful anger. That evening, the final auction notice went public. Portrait of a woman in blue would be the centerpiece lot at Harrington House, Manhattan, 7 o'clock. The press release called it a once-in-a-generation offering authenticated by the Whitmore legacy. Annie read the announcement on Samuel's tablet at Street Marks, where everyone had gathered again. Dr. Alden cursed under his breath. Elijah shook his head. Detective Bennett studied the document like it might confess if she stared long enough. They used the word legacy 5 times, Elijah said. Always worry when thieves start talking about legacy. Bennett's phone buzzed. She stepped away, listened, then turned back. Customs flagged Victor Lorne's travel reservation. He's booked on a late flight tomorrow night. With the original? Annie asked. Unknown. But we have eyes on him. Samuel looked at the group. Julian's doctor approved limited transport with medical support. He can attend the auction for no more than 30 minutes. Denise closed her eyes briefly. 30 minutes. Dr. Alden said, "Then we need 10. Annie touched Grandma Rose's tin in her bag. "What do you need from me?" Detective Bennett answered. "Courage, accuracy, and no improvising." Elijah added, "And comfortable shoes." Annie looked around the church basement. Her mother, the old guard, the detective, the attorney, the retired expert, Samuel with his careful hands folded around Julian's authorization letter. None of them were rich enough alone to stop Nathaniel Whitmore. But together, they had made a net. And tomorrow night, that net would be thrown under bright lights. Before they left, Denise pulled Annie aside near the mural Grandma Rose had restored years ago. The painted figures were faded but still standing. Their hands lifted toward a sky that had cracked with age. "You remember what your grandma said about old paintings?" Denise asked. Annie nodded. "Don't rush them. Listen until they tell you where they hurt." Denise touched her cheek. "Same with people. Tomorrow, you don't have to shout. Just show them where the lie hurts." Annie leaned into her mother's hand for 1 second, then stepped back. Outside, Manhattan waited with its auction rooms, private cars, polished lies, and men who believed a girl with no title could still be made invisible. Annie Carter went home and laid out her white cotton gloves. The morning of the auction came without mercy. Annie woke before her alarm and lay still, while the city gathered itself outside her window. A garbage truck groaned down the block. Someone's radio played low through the wall. In the kitchen, Denise was already moving around, opening cabinets with more force than necessary. Annie turned her head toward the chair beside her bed. Her white cotton gloves lay folded on top of her coat. Grandma Rose's tin sat beside them. The sight of both made her stomach twist. Tonight, she would walk into Harrington House, one of the most respected auction rooms in Manhattan, and challenge a painting that collectors, lawyers, and wealthy families were ready to call a masterpiece. She would do it in front of people who had never needed to prove they belonged anywhere. She got dressed slowly. Plain black pants, white blouse, dark sweater, her best coat, which still looked too simple for the room she was about to enter. She brushed her hair back and tied it neatly, then looked at herself in the small mirror above the dresser. She did not look like the girl in the rumors. She did not look like a thief. She looked tired, young, scared, but she also looked like someone who had stopped asking fear for permission. In the kitchen, Denise had made grits, eggs, and tea. Annie stared at the plate. "Mama, can't eat." Denise set a fork beside it. "You can eat 3 bites and call it obedience. This isn't church. It is my kitchen. Same rules." Annie sat and ate 3 bites. Denise watched until she swallowed, then poured tea into a chipped mug. "Your grandma used to say a steady hand starts in the stomach. She also used to say cold pizza counted as breakfast. She was a complicated woman." Annie almost laughed. It helped. At 10, Marjorie Bell arrived with a folder of printed messages, receipts, and copies of Annie's photos. Samuel came soon after, carrying Julian's signed authorization for independent examination of the portrait. Detective Bennett called from her car to confirm that her team had eyes on Victor Lorne and that customs had been alerted, but she could not move openly at the auction until there was either clear fraud exposure or a direct admission. "That means no heroics," Bennett said through the phone. "Annie, you hear me?" "Yes, ma'am." "You speak when asked. You show what you know. You don't let them pull you into anger." Annie glanced at Denise. "I'll try." "No," Bennett said. "You'll do better than try. People like Vivian Whitmore are trained to make decent people look unstable. Don't give her your face." After the call ended, Samuel placed a small envelope on the table. Annie looked at it. "What is that?" "A temporary visitor credential for Harrington House, issued under Julian's guest authority." Annie opened it. Her name was printed in black letters, Annie Carter, restoration consultant. She stared at the words too long. Denise leaned over. "Consultant?" Samuel's expression remained calm, but there was a faint satisfaction in his eyes. "Accurate for tonight's purpose." Annie touched the badge with one finger. "I've never been called that before." "Then it is overdue." She wanted to believe it fully. Instead, she tucked the badge into her coat pocket like something fragile. The day moved in pieces. Marjorie reviewed what Annie should and should not say. Dr. Alden called to confirm he would meet them at the auction house and had arranged for standard UV equipment to be available through a friendly conservation contact on the board. Elijah sent one message at noon. "Crane nervous. Made 3 calls from loading office. Mentioned Lorne once. Then another an hour later. I'm fine. Don't fuss. Denise fussed anyway. That old man better not get himself hurt trying to out-sneak criminals. Samuel checked his phone. He is careful. Careful men still bleed. Samuel did not argue. By late afternoon, the sky over Brooklyn had turned a flat winter gray. Annie stood by the window while Denise pressed her coat with the little steam iron that leaked at the handle. The apartment smelled of starch, tea, and rain. On the table, Grandma Rose's tin sat open. Inside, the vials were wrapped in cotton, beside a small magnifier and folded gloves. Annie picked up the gloves. When Grandma bought these, I thought they meant the painting was too important for my skin, she said. Denise stopped ironing. She told me, no, baby. They mean your hands are worth preparing. I didn't understand then. You understand now? Annie rubbed the cotton between her fingers. I think so. A knock came at the door. Denise went still, then checked the peephole. It's Mrs. Alvarez. She opened the door. Mrs. Alvarez stood in the hallway with a small brown paper bag. For luck, she said, handing it to Annie. Inside was a rosary and a peppermint candy. Annie smiled softly. Thank you, ma'am. I don't know art, Mrs. Alvarez said, but I know when people with money start sending letters, they are scared. Make them more scared. Denise said, that is not exactly a church blessing. It is a Brooklyn blessing. At 5:30, they left for Manhattan. Samuel had arranged a car despite Denise's earlier objections. This time, no one argued. Marjorie rode in front beside the driver. Denise and Annie sat in the back with Samuel. The city slid past in wet glass and headlights, Brooklyn giving way to the bridge, the river below dark and restless. Annie looked at the skyline. Somewhere in those buildings were people who bought history, insured it, hung it under controlled light, and called themselves caretakers. Yet a girl who cleaned dust from their tables had been the one to notice what they tried to steal. Samuel's phone buzzed. He read the message and exhaled slowly. What? Annie asked. Julian is en route with medical transport. Doctor, nurse, oxygen, and enough stubbornness to concern everyone. Denise muttered. Good. Another message came. Samuel's expression changed. Victor Lorne has entered Harrington House through the private service entrance. Marjorie turned from the front seat. With the original? Unknown. Annie's hand tightened around Grandma Rose's tin. At Harrington House, the entrance glowed under gold light. Men in dark coats handed keys to valets. Women in silk scarves stepped from black cars. Photographers waited near the ropes, murmuring names Annie recognized from museum plaques and magazine articles. She had passed buildings like this before, always from the sidewalk, never imagining she would enter through the front. The car stopped. For a moment, Annie could not move. Denise took her hand. Breathe. Annie looked at her mother. Denise gave a small smile. Yes, I know. Seems to be the family word now. Annie breathed in, then out. Samuel opened the door. Cold air rushed in. Cameras flashed for someone behind them, not for Annie. That was fine. She did not need their light yet. Inside, Harrington House smelled of waxed floors, perfume, old paper, and money. The lobby ceiling rose high above them, painted with pale clouds and gold trim. Staff in black suits moved quietly, directing guests toward the main auction room. Annie clipped the visitor badge to her coat. Restoration consultant. The guard at the inner door looked at it, then at her, then back at the badge. His hesitation lasted less than 2 seconds, but Annie felt every part of it. Samuel stepped beside her. Miss Carter is with Mr. Whitmore. The guard opened the door. The auction room was already half full. At the front, under controlled light, stood portrait of a woman in blue. The false painting looked calm, expensive, and ready to be believed. Annie felt a pulse of anger so sharp she almost welcomed it. Dr. Alden waited near the second row, his tweed jacket buttoned wrong. He nodded when he saw her. Good, he said. You brought the gloves. I brought everything. Excellent. Truth dislikes arriving underdressed. From across the room, Nathaniel Whitmore saw her. His face did not change at first. Then the smile he had been giving a collector near the aisle faded by half an inch. Vivian stood beside him in a dark green dress, one hand resting lightly on a champagne glass. When she turned and saw Annie, her eyes narrowed. Not surprise. Irritation. Annie understood then that they had expected her to stay wounded at home. Vivian crossed the room first. "Annie," she said softly, as if greeting a confused child, "this is a private event." Marjorie stepped forward. "Miss Carter is an invited guest under Julian Whitmore's authority." Vivian's eyes shifted to her. "And you are?" "Her attorney." That cost Vivian half a breath. She recovered quickly. How resourceful. Nathaniel joined them, his voice low. "You should leave before you embarrass yourself." Annie felt Denise move closer behind her, but she answered for herself. "I already left once when you told me to. It didn't make you tell the truth." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Before he could answer, a quiet disturbance moved through the back of the room. Heads turned. A medical transport chair rolled through the double doors. Julian Whitmore entered with a nurse at one side, oxygen tubing beneath his nose, Samuel's authorization folder resting across his lap. He looked pale, thinner than the portrait in the lobby at Whitmore and Vale, but his eyes were open and fixed on the front of the room. The whispers began at once. Nathaniel stepped toward him. "Father, this is Reckless." Julian looked at his son as if assessing a damaged canvas. "Reckless was leaving me under a rack without my inhaler." The room changed. Vivian's smile vanished. The auctioneer stood frozen beside the podium. Julian lifted one weak hand toward the portrait. "That sale does not proceed." Nathaniel's voice sharpened. "You are under medication. You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." Julian turned his head. "The painting on that stand is not the original I examined." A murmur swept through the room. Nathaniel laughed once, too loudly. "This is absurd." Julian looked toward Annie. "Miss Carter." Every eye followed. Annie felt the weight of the room land on her. Collectors, lawyers, experts, journalists, staff, people who had learned her name from rumors before hearing her voice. Her knees wanted to weaken. They did not. She stepped forward with Grandma Rose's tin in one hand and her white gloves in the other. Julian's voice carried, thin but clear. "This young woman saved my life. Tonight, she may save something else." Annie walked toward the portrait, past Vivian's cold stare, past Nathaniel's controlled fury, past every invisible line that had ever told her to stay out of sight. At the edge of the platform, she put on her gloves. Then she looked at the room and said, "I need a UV lamp." "I need a UV lamp," Annie said. For a moment, no one moved. The auction room seemed to hold its breath. Then voices began to rise in careful, expensive murmurs. The auctioneer looked toward Nathaniel, then toward Julian. "Mr. Whitmore, this is highly irregular." Julian sat in his medical chair near the aisle, one hand resting against the blanket over his knees. The oxygen tube beneath his nose made him look frailer than anyone in that room had ever seen him, but his eyes were steady. "Fraud usually is," he said. Nathaniel stepped forward. "This is madness. You are allowing a fired cleaning girl to interfere with a legally scheduled auction." Annie felt the words hit the room before they hit her. Fired. Cleaning girl. He had chosen them carefully, placing her back where he thought she belonged. Marjorie Bell answered before Annie could. "Miss Carter is here as a witness and restoration consultant under Mr. Whitmore's authorization." Vivian gave a soft laugh. "Consultant? That is generous." Dr. Alden stepped from the second row, adjusting his glasses. "Not as generous as calling this authentication process complete, without addressing the concerns now raised." Nathaniel turned toward him. "And you are?" "Peter Alden, former senior conservation specialist at the Metropolitan Museum. Retired, not blind." A few people in the room whispered his name. That changed the air. Nathaniel noticed it. "This is a public spectacle," he said. "If my father has concerns, they can be addressed privately after the sale." "No," Julian said. "That is how forgeries become investments." The auctioneer swallowed. "We do have a UV examination lamp on site for condition review." "Bring it," Julian said. An employee looked at Nathaniel, hesitated, then left through the side door. Annie stood beside the platform with her gloves on. Grandma Rose's tin closed in her palm. She could feel everyone looking at her. Some with curiosity, some with pity, some with the quiet irritation of people forced to watch someone they had dismissed become necessary. Vivian moved closer, her voice low enough that only Annie and Denise could hear. "You have no idea what you are doing." Annie looked at the portrait. "I know exactly where to look. Do you?" Or did some old churchwoman teach you parlor tricks and call them expertise? Denise stepped forward, but Annie lifted one hand slightly. My grandmother taught me patience, Annie said. You might recognize it. It's what people without power use while waiting for people like you to make mistakes. Vivian's face tightened. The employee returned with a portable UV lamp and a pair of dark protective glasses. Dr. Alden took them first, inspected the lamp, then handed it to Annie. Slowly, he said. Start at the varnish field near the upper left, then the dress. Annie nodded. Her hand shook once. She let it shake and did not hide it. The main lights were dimmed. A soft hush moved through the room as the portrait fell into shadow. Under normal light, the painted woman in blue looked old, mournful, and valuable. Under UV, truth began to crawl out of the surface. A strange glow spread across the varnish. Two, even in some places, dead in others. Patches near the woman's shoulder fluoresced in a way Annie had seen on recent coatings. Not aged natural resin. The blue dress, the very thing that had bothered her from the start, showed a dull, modern response beneath the surface glaze. Annie heard Dr. Alden inhale. Say what you see, Detective Bennett said from near the aisle. She had entered quietly with two plainclothes officers and stood now with her notebook open. Annie kept the lamp steady. The varnish doesn't age consistently. On a painting this old, you'd expect uneven fluorescence from natural oxidation and past cleaning. This layer is too controlled. It looks applied to imitate age. Nathaniel scoffed. That proves nothing. Many paintings are cleaned before sale. Annie moved the lamp lower. Cleaning doesn't change the back lining. A staff member brought a mirror and tilted the painting carefully at Julian's command. Dr. Alden and another auction house specialist helped expose the reverse without removing it from its support. Annie pointed, careful not to touch. The archival backing had uneven hand stitching along this side. I saw it before. Mr. Whitmore's private archive shows the same thing. This backing is fresh. The stitches are regular. Samuel opened the folder and passed copies to the auctioneer, Dr. Alden, and Detective Bennett. The original archive photo was placed on the table beside the live image from the back of the painting. The difference was visible even to people who knew nothing about restoration. Amule Rose. Nathaniel's face hardened. That archive image may be outdated. Julian turned his head slowly. It was taken 6 weeks ago under my supervision. Vivian cut in. Voice bright and brittle. Julian, with respect, you are recovering from trauma. This young woman has had access to the work. She could have altered something. Annie looked at her. When? Vivian blinked. Excuse me? When did I alter it? Before I called 911? While I was lifting your father-in-law from under a rack? Or after Mr. Crane fired me and watched me leave? Vivian's mouth closed. Mr. Crane, standing near the rear wall, had gone pale. He had tried to stay half hidden behind two Harrington House staff members. But Elijah Brooks stood near the back door, watching him. Dr. Alden leaned closer to the lower edge. Miss Carter, you mentioned a controlled spot test. Annie opened Grandma Rose's tin. The small glass vial rested inside its cotton wrapping. She lifted it carefully. Nathaniel moved fast. Absolutely not. She is not putting some homemade chemical on a multi-million-dollar work. Dr. Alden gave him a dry look. It is not homemade if properly diluted and used on a non-image edge. Though I admit, many museums would be improved by remembering some grandmothers knew more chemistry than trustees. A few nervous laughs broke and died quickly. Annie looked at Julian. I need your permission. You have it, Julian said. The auction house specialist shifted uneasily. For liability, we need documentation. Marjorie stepped forward with a paper. Signed authorization from the owner of record, Julian Whitmore, witnessed by counsel. Nathaniel snapped. I am acting trustee for certain family holdings. Samuel looked up from the folder. Not for this work. Julian never transferred authority over this lot to you. The room turned toward Nathaniel. His jaw worked once. Annie dipped a cotton swab into the mild solution and pressed it against the rim of the vial to remove nearly all liquid. Her grandmother's voice moved through her hand. Never flood. Never rush. Ask the surface. Don't bully it. She touched the swab to a tiny edge where the paint layer met the frame line, an area outside the visible image. Nothing happened at first. Vivian smiled. Well, then the top glaze softened. A thin film lifted under the cotton, revealing a small mark beneath the artificial aging layer. Annie leaned closer. Dr. Alden brought the UV lamp back over the area. 2 letters appeared under the disturbed coating. VL. The room went silent. Dr. Alden whispered, "Victor Lorne." Detective Bennett stepped forward. "Say that again, Doctor." "Victor Lorne," he said, louder now. "A known restorer with a long history of suspected forgery work. He uses coded internal marks during fabrication. Most never remain on finished pieces unless the work is rushed." Elijah lifted a clear plastic evidence sleeve. "Like this?" Detective Bennett turned. Elijah held the discarded packing material he had found, the faint pencil mark visible under the plastic. "Found in the waste area after the crate moved." "Same mark." Mr. Crane took 1 step toward the side exit. "Elijah," Bennett said without looking away from the painting. Already watching him, 2 plainclothes officers moved toward Crane. He froze. Nathaniel's voice rose. "This is theater. A mark means nothing. For all we know, she put it there." Annie turned to him then. Her hands were still gloved. One held the cotton swab, the other held the vial. She looked very young beneath the auction lights, but she no longer looked small. "You said I was a cleaning girl," she said. "Now you're saying I'm skilled enough to forge a masterwork. Stage old varnish, alter backing, move a private crate, disable cameras, hide an inhaler, and plant a forger's mark in front of half of Manhattan. Which lie do you want to keep?" A sound moved through the room. Not quite approval, not yet, but recognition. Vivian stepped in sharply. "Do not speak to him that way." Annie looked at her. "You called me a mess. You said girls without names don't get into certain rooms." Vivian's face went still. Detective Bennett's eyes flicked toward Annie. The call was recorded. Vivian knew it too. Annie continued, quieter now. "I didn't come here to belong to your room. I came because Mr. Whitmore couldn't breathe, and because somebody used art like a mask for greed." Nathaniel turned toward Julian. "Stop this. You're destroying the family." Julian looked at his son for a long time. Pain sat heavily on his face. But beneath it was something worse than anger. Disappointment had finally finished becoming knowledge. "You did that," Julian said, "when you hid my inhaler and left me under that rack." "I didn't." Detective Bennett's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, then at Nathaniel. "Victor Lorne was detained at Teterboro 15 minutes ago," she said. "Customs agents found a crated painting in private transport under export documents tied to a shell company. Preliminary images match the archival back of the original portrait of a woman in blue." Nathaniel's face lost all color. Vivian whispered, "Nathaniel." He turned on her. "Shut up." That was the first honest thing he had said all night. Bennett nodded to the officers. "Nathaniel Whitmore, we need you to come with us. Vivian Whitmore, you as well. Harold Crane, don't move." Crane broke at once. "I didn't know he'd take the inhaler. I only shut down the systems. I only did what Mr. Whitmore told me." Nathaniel lunged toward him. "You idiot." The officers caught Nathaniel by both arms. Guests stood from their seats. Phones rose. The auctioneer backed away from the podium. Vivian tried to speak, but no polished sentence came. Her cream-colored world had split open under a light she could not flatter. Annie stepped back from the portrait and capped the vial with both hands. Only then did she realize she was shaking. Denise reached her first, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You did it," Denise whispered. Annie looked at the exposed mark, the false surface, the stunned faces, Julian in his chair with tears he refused to wipe away. "No," Annie said. "The painting did. I just listened." Across the room, Detective Bennett read Nathaniel his rights, while the cameras kept recording. The sale of the century had become a crime scene, and the girl they tried to erase stood beside the truth with cotton gloves on her hands. The room did not return to order after Nathaniel, Vivian, and Crane were taken away. It only learned how to stand still under shock. Guests remained frozen between their chairs and the aisle. Some lowered their phones as if ashamed of recording too late. Others kept filming because shame had never stopped anyone from collecting proof when proof had become valuable. Annie stood near the portrait with Denise's arm around her shoulders and Grandma Rose's tin closed in one hand. The cotton gloves on her fingers had picked up no paint, no gold leaf, no dirt from the frame. Still, she felt as if the whole room was staring at her hands, waiting to decide whether they had saved something or ruined it. Dr. Alden leaned over the tiny tested edge and spoke quietly with the auction house specialist. Detective Bennett was near the doorway, giving instructions to the plainclothes officers. Samuel stood beside Julian, one hand near the back of the medical chair, watching every person who came too close. Julian looked tired enough to vanish into the blanket over his knees. Annie saw it and stepped toward him. "Mr. Whitmore?" He turned his head. The oxygen tube tugged slightly against his cheek. "Miss Carter, you should go back to the hospital. So should many reputations in this room." She almost smiled, but his breathing worried her. "Please." The word did what arguments had not. Julian looked at Samuel, then nodded once. 5 minutes. Samuel's mouth tightened. "You said that 10 minutes ago. Then I have become consistent." Denise stepped forward. "Sir, with respect, don't make my daughter save your breathing twice in 1 week." Julian looked at her. For the first time that night, something like warmth entered his face. "Mrs. Carter, I believe that is the most practical advice I have received." It was not advice, it was warning. "Yes, ma'am." Annie heard a few people nearby react, not quite laughing, not quite comfortable. It bothered her that they could find charm now. After watching the same woman's daughter be called a thief, Julian seemed to hear it too. His expression changed, and when he spoke again, he raised his voice enough to carry. "No one leaves this room believing tonight was merely an auction irregularity," he said. The murmurs stopped. Julian straightened as much as his body allowed. "Annie Carter saved my life when I could not breathe. She was then accused, dismissed, threatened, and professionally harmed by people connected to my family and my institution. The portrait before you is not the original I examined. The real work has been recovered through law enforcement action, and the sale is canceled." The auctioneer looked as if he might faint. "Mr. Whitmore, perhaps a formal statement." "This is a formal statement," Julian said. A journalist near the third row lifted a recorder. "Mr. Whitmore, are you alleging your son attempted to kill you?" Detective Bennett stepped in. "That question will be addressed through the investigation. Mr. Whitmore has made a victim statement tonight, not a press conference." Julian looked at Annie. "Not yet." Those 2 words unsettled her. Not yet meant this would not end in the auction room. Not yet meant cameras, headlines, statements, lawyers, strangers learning her name from a screen. Annie wanted justice, but she had not understood that justice also had a public entrance, and everyone watched who walked through it. Dr. Alden approached her with a careful nod. "Miss Carter, I need to document the test site. Would you stand beside me while I record what you did?" Annie looked at Denise. Denise said, "Go on. Let them write it right." Annie joined Dr. Alden near the painting. He spoke into a small recorder, naming the time, place, witnesses, test location, UV response, and the visible VL mark beneath the artificial surface. He asked Annie simple questions, not as a trap, but as a way of preserving the truth. "Did you touch the image area?" "No, sir." "Did you apply solution anywhere except the outer edge?" "No, sir." "Was the amount controlled?" "Yes, sir. 1 damp swab, excess removed." "Why that location?" "Because it was outside the main image, near the frame line, and the false aging layer looked weakest there." He nodded. "Good." The auction house specialist, a woman in black glasses with a tight mouth, looked at Annie with discomfort. "You understand this will have to undergo laboratory analysis?" "Yes, ma'am." "You also understand visual observations are preliminary?" Annie met her eyes. "Yes, ma'am, but preliminary does not mean imaginary." The woman looked away first. That small surrender did not make Annie proud. It made her sad. So much damage could have been avoided if one person in that world had asked what she saw before deciding what she was. A man in a navy suit approached Samuel and spoke in a low voice. But Annie heard enough. "Board members, insurers, emergency meeting, public liability." Samuel listened without expression. Julian did not. "Tell the board they can meet after the police finish collecting evidence." The man lowered his voice further. "Mr. Whitmore, with all respect, the institution's reputation—" Julian cut him off. "The institution's reputation is lying on that platform under a false varnish. Let it wait its turn." The man retreated. Detective Bennett walked over to Annie. "You did well." Annie felt strange hearing that. "I was scared." I did not say you weren't. What happens now? Now the real work starts. Statements, chain of custody, forensic analysis, financial records, hospital records, phone records. Nathaniel and Vivian will hire attorneys before sunrise. Crane may try to trade information. Lorne may already be talking. Will they still say I did something wrong? Yes, Bennett said. Denise made a sound. Detective, I'm not going to lie to her, Bennett said. They may try. But now they have to say it against evidence, witnesses, recordings, and Julian Whitmore's statement. That is a different room. Annie looked at the fake portrait. Under normal light, the woman in blue still seemed almost real. That angered her. Lies did not always look ugly. Sometimes they were painted well. What about my apprenticeship? Annie asked before she could stop herself. Bennett's face softened by a fraction. That is not my department, but reputations can be corrected. Can they? Samuel answered from behind her. Yes. But correction must be public enough to meet the damage where it was done. Julian heard him. It will be. Annie did not know whether to believe that. Not because Julian sounded false, but because she had learned that powerful promises often arrived, dressed better than they behaved. Medical staff moved closer. The nurse with Julian touched his shoulder. Mr. Whitmore, we need to leave now. This time he did not argue. He looked at Annie. May I speak with you tomorrow? Annie hesitated. Denise watched him carefully. Julian understood. With your mother present. And your attorney. Anywhere you choose. Annie nodded. Okay. I owe you more than gratitude. You owe me the truth, she said. He took that in. Yes, and you owe it where people can hear it. Julian looked around the room at the collectors, experts, donors, journalists, and staff who had watched a girl in white gloves reveal what millions had tried to hide. I know, he said. As Samuel rolled him toward the exit, people parted for Julian Whitmore as they always had. But this time, Annie noticed something different. They also parted for her. Not fully. Not comfortably. But enough for her to walk beside Denise without brushing anyone's shoulder. Outside Harrington House, the night had turned sharp and clear. Police lights painted the sidewalk blue and red. Reporters gathered behind a barrier, calling questions that tangled together. Mr. Whitmore, did your son commit fraud? Who is the young woman? Is the painting fake? Was there an attempted murder? Samuel guided Julian toward the medical transport. Detective Bennett held the press back. Marjorie walked close to Annie, already saying, no comment tonight. But one reporter shouted louder than the rest. Miss Carter, did you expose the forgery? Annie stopped. Denise touched her arm. Baby. Annie knew she should keep walking. She knew Marjorie would prefer it. She knew Detective Bennett had told her not to improvise, but she also knew silence had almost buried her. She turned just enough for the microphones to catch her voice. I told the truth about what I saw, Annie said. That should not be unusual. Then she walked on. The cameras flashed. In the medical transport, Julian watched through the window as Annie disappeared into Samuel's waiting car with her mother. He looked older now, and smaller, but not defeated. Samuel climbed in beside him. She spoke. Julian said, yes. Good. Samuel looked at the closed doors of Harrington House, where police still moved in and out beneath the gold lights. Tomorrow will be worse. Julian closed his eyes. Then tomorrow we begin repairing what my name helped break. Across the street, inside the car, Annie sat between Denise and Marjorie with Grandma Rose's tin on her lap. Her hands had finally stopped shaking, not because the fear was gone, but because something stronger had taken a seat beside it. Denise leaned close. You all right? Annie looked out at the reporters, the auction house, the police lights, and the city that had tried to make her invisible until she became inconvenient. No, she said, but I'm still here. Denise took her hand, and for that night, still here was enough. By morning, Annie Carter's name was everywhere. Not loudly at first, not cleanly. It moved through the city the way rumors always did, changing shape as it passed from phone screens to breakfast tables to office elevators. Some headlines called her a young restorer. Some called her a former cleaner. One article called her an unlikely witness, which made Denise snort so hard she nearly spilled her coffee. Unlikely to who, she said, glaring at the phone. People who don't know how eyes work? Annie sat at the kitchen table with a mug of tea cooling between her hands. She had slept maybe 2 hours, and even that sleep had been thin. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the auction room again, the UV light, the mark beneath the glaze, Nathaniel's face when the truth finally reached him, Vivian's mouth tightening when her polish failed. Now the world knew something had happened. But knowing was not the same as understanding. Marjorie had warned her before sunrise. You will see your name used by people who never called you. Do not answer comments. Do not correct strangers online. Do not give interviews without me. And for the love of every judge still worth their chair, do not read the ugly parts alone. Annie had nodded. Then she had read anyway. Some people praised her. Some said she was brave. Some said Julian Whitmore had used her to protect himself from scandal. Others asked why a night employee was near the painting at all. A few comments were uglier than that. The kind Annie had heard in grocery aisles and school hallways. Now typed with the confidence of people hiding behind blank profile pictures. Denise took the phone from her hand. Enough. I need to know what they're saying. No. You need to know what is true. That is not the same thing. A knock came at the door. Denise went still, then checked the peephole. This time, she opened it without the chain. Samuel Price stood in the hallway with Marjorie Bell beside him. Behind them was Detective Bennett, holding a paper coffee cup and looking as if she had not slept either. Come in, Denise said. I made coffee, but it's not fancy. Bennett stepped inside. Fancy coffee tastes like someone charged you for the cup twice. Denise gave her the first real smile of the morning. Samuel looked at Annie. How are you? Annie almost said fine. The word rose from habit, not truth. Tired, she said. That is more believable. Marjorie placed a folder on the table. We need to discuss today. Annie looked at the folder as if it might bite. What happens today? Julian is holding a press conference at 1 o'clock, Samuel said. Denise folded her arms. At the hospital? At Whitmore Legacy Foundation headquarters. His doctor objected. Julian objected harder. Annie's stomach tightened. Why? Samuel's face was calm, but his eyes were not. Because the accusation against you was made in public enough to travel. His correction has to travel farther. Marjorie opened the folder. You do not have to attend. You have given your statement. You proved what you saw. No one can require you to stand beside him. Annie looked from Marjorie to Bennett to Samuel. Does he want me there? Samuel answered carefully. Yes, but he was clear that wanting is not asking. Denise sat beside Annie. Baby, this is your choice. Annie stared at the tea in her mug. The surface had gone still. Part of her wanted to stay home, to close the curtains, turn off every phone, and let rich people clean up the mess they made. But another part of her remembered standing in the auction room, while Nathaniel called her a cleaning girl as if work were shame. She remembered Vivian saying girls without names did not get into certain rooms. She remembered Mr. Crane looking at her like the lie had already won. If I don't go, Annie said, they'll tell the story around me. Bennett nodded once. They might. And if I do go, some will still twist it, Marjorie said. But they will have to twist it while you are standing there. Denise touched Annie's wrist. You don't owe anybody your pain. I know. Do you? Annie looked at her mother. I don't want to go because I owe them. I want to go because I'm tired of hearing my name from mouths that don't know me. The room went quiet. Samuel lowered his head slightly. Then we leave in an hour. At noon, Annie stood in front of her mirror again. She wore the same black pants and white blouse from the auction, now pressed by Denise with more care than the fabric deserved. Her cotton gloves were in her coat pocket. Not because she needed them, but because touching them steadied her. Grandma Rose's tin stayed at home on the kitchen shelf. Today was not about the painting. Today was about the girl they tried to paint over. Outside Whitmore Legacy Foundation headquarters, reporters crowded behind barricades. The building rose in clean glass and pale stone, with Julian's family name carved above the entrance. Annie looked at that name and thought how strange it was that letters on a building could make people bow their voices. Samuel walked on her left, Denise on her right. Marjorie and Bennett followed close behind. Flashes went off the moment reporters recognized her. Annie, did you know Julian Whitmore before the accident? Were you fired for exposing the painting? Did Nathaniel threaten you? Are you suing the Whitmore family? Denise leaned close, eyes forward. Annie kept walking. Inside, the lobby was filled with staff, board members, lawyers, and cameras. Some people looked at Annie with sympathy. Some looked through her with old habits not yet broken. She noticed both and gave neither the satisfaction of shrinking. Julian waited near the podium in a wheelchair. Oxygen beside him, but not in use for the moment. He wore a dark suit, though it hung looser on him than it should have. His face was pale. Still, when he saw Annie, he tried to stand. She crossed the room quickly. "Don't." He stopped halfway, one hand gripping the armrest. Denise said, "Sir, I thought we discussed unnecessary foolishness." Julian looked up at her. "Mrs. Carter, I was attempting respect. Respect can sit down if its ribs are bruised." A few staff members looked startled. "Julie," they smiled faintly and sat back. "I stand corrected. Or rather, seated." Annie did not laugh, but the tightness in her chest loosened. Julian turned to her. "Miss Carter, thank you for coming." "I didn't come for thank you." "I know." His gaze dropped briefly. "That is why I prepared something more difficult." The press conference began at 1. Samuel stepped to the microphone first, gave basic facts, and introduced Julian. No one mentioned family privacy. No one spoke of unfortunate misunderstandings. The language was careful, but not evasive. Then Julian rolled forward. "I am Julian Whitmore," he said, his voice rough but clear. "2 nights ago, I nearly died in a storage room at Whitmore and Vale Art Storage and Restoration. A rack collapsed. My inhaler was missing. Dust from old canvases and preservation materials triggered a severe asthma attack. I was found by Annie Carter." Cameras shifted toward her. Annie felt the attention like heat. Julian continued. "Miss Carter was an 18-year-old night employee assigned to cleaning and restoration support. She called emergency services. She moved me from the worst of the dust. She helped me breathe until paramedics arrived. I am alive because of her." Annie looked down. Denise whispered, "No, look up." Annie did. Julian's hand tightened on the paper before him. Instead of being thanked, Miss Carter was accused. She was fired. Her professional reputation was attacked. Her apprenticeship opportunity was damaged. Legal pressure was directed at her and her family. These actions were wrong. A board member near the wall shifted uncomfortably. Julian looked toward him, then back to the cameras. "Let me be clearer. They were not merely unfortunate. They were cruel. They were classist. They were racially charged. And they were made possible by a culture I allowed to exist under my name." The lobby went still. Vivian could have polished cruelty. Nathaniel could have weaponized family. But this was different. A rich man publicly saying the thing rich rooms usually buried. Julian turned his chair slightly toward Annie. Miss Carter also identified the forged painting that was presented for auction as Portrait of a Woman in Blue. Her observations were correct. The original has since been recovered. Law enforcement will handle the criminal matter. I will not interfere with that process except to cooperate fully. A reporter raised a hand. "Mr. Whitmore, are you confirming that your son is under investigation?" Detective Bennett stepped forward. "Questions about active charges go through my office." Julian waited, then said, "I am confirming that truth should not depend on the last name of the person speaking it." Annie felt something in her throat tighten. Julian looked at her again. "Miss Carter, I called you a restorer last night because that is what you are. Not because I made you one. Because I finally saw what others should have seen before." He reached for another sheet. "To begin repairing the harm done, Whitmore Legacy Foundation will fund the restoration of Miss Carter's professional standing, including legal support, tuition support if she wishes it, and an independent studio in Brooklyn dedicated to art conservation training for young people who have been denied access to this field." The reporters erupted. Annie stiffened. She had known Julian wanted to do something. She had not known he would say it like that, in front of everyone, as if a future could be announced into existence. She stepped forward before Marjorie could stop her. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, not into the microphone yet, "I'm not for sale." The lobby heard it anyway. Julian nodded slowly. "I know. I won't be used to make this look clean. You shouldn't be. And if there is a studio, it won't be some charity with my face on a brochure. No, it trains kids who don't get invited into museums unless they're on school trips. It hires people from the neighborhood. It has rules that keep your family from controlling it." "Samuel," standing behind Julian, looked down briefly. If Annie had not known better, she would have thought he was hiding a smile. Julian said, "Agreed." Annie looked at the cameras. There was no hiding now. Marjorie whispered, "You don't have to speak." Annie knew that. But she also knew there was a young girl somewhere watching a clip on her phone, deciding what rooms were not meant for her. Annie stepped to the microphone. "My name is Annie Carter," she said. Her voice shook once, then steadied. "I did not save Mr. Whitmore because he was rich. I helped him because he could not breathe. I did not speak about the painting because it was expensive. I spoke because it was false." The room quieted. I was told to stay out of sight at work. I was told important people should not feel uncomfortable. But the truth is, some people only call a room comfortable when nobody poor is allowed to be seen in it. Denise covered her mouth with one hand. Annie continued, "I am grateful that Mr. Whitmore told the truth today. But I want people to understand something. A public apology does not erase what private cruelty does. It has to be followed by doors opening, records corrected, and people being believed before they are destroyed." She looked at the cameras, not Julian, not Samuel, not her mother. "If you remember anything about me, don't remember that I was a cleaning girl who got lucky. Remember that I was working. Remember that I was watching. Remember that people you don't notice may be the ones keeping the whole room from falling apart." She stepped back. For a moment there was no applause. It was better that way. Applause would have been too easy. Then an older woman near the back, one of the foundation clerks, began to clap. Slowly, then someone else, then more. Annie did not smile. She turned and walked back to her mother. Denise took her hand and squeezed it hard. Outside, the headlines had already begun to change. Inside, Julian closed his eyes for a moment, not in weakness, but because repair had finally started, and he knew it would cost more than money. 3 weeks later, the name Whitmore no longer sounded untouchable. It still sat on buildings, foundation letters, museum donor walls, and old auction catalogs, but something had changed in the way people said it. Before, they said it with the soft respect given to money that had lasted more than one generation. Now they paused first, as if checking whether the name might leave dust on their tongue. Nathaniel Whitmore was awaiting trial on charges tied to fraud, evidence tampering, conspiracy, and reckless endangerment. Vivian Whitmore's attorney had released a statement claiming she had been misled by her husband, but Detective Bennett had found enough calls, emails, and threats to make that story thin. Harold Crane had tried to save himself by saying he only followed instructions. It did not help him as much as he hoped. Men who opened doors for crime often learned too late that crime did not hold the door open for them. Victor Lorne was talking. According to the first reports, he had been promised a fortune to create the forged portrait of a woman in blue and arrange the private sale of the original overseas. He had not cared who got hurt beneath the collapsed rack. Men like him rarely cared about damage unless it appeared on canvas. Annie read the updates only when Marjorie sent them. She no longer searched her name at night. Denise had made that a house rule after finding her daughter sitting in the dark at 2 a.m, reading strangers argue about whether she deserved what had happened. "People who don't know you don't get to tuck you into bed angry," Denise had said, taking the phone from her hand. Annie had not argued. The apprenticeship program that rejected her sent a formal apology. It was careful, embarrassed, and much too late. They offered to reopen her application. Annie thanked them and declined, not because she did not want training, but because she had learned the difference between a door and a leash. Julian Whitmore's apology had traveled farther than anyone expected. Clips from the press conference played on morning shows, church Facebook pages, museum forums, and local news segments with anchors speaking in serious voices about class, race, labor, and the invisible people who keep cultural institutions alive. Some people praised Julian, some praised Annie. Some said the whole thing was being turned into politics, as if fairness only became political when the wrong person asked for it. Annie did not care what they called it anymore. She had work to do. The studio opened on a cold Saturday in Brooklyn, in a narrow brick storefront that had once been a tailor shop. The sign above the door was simple: Carter Community Restoration Studio. No Whitmore name, no gold lettering, no donor plaque in the window. Julian had offered one. Annie had said no. "If you want to help," she told him, "help without needing your name to sit in the best light." Samuel Price, standing beside Julian's wheelchair, had looked down at his shoes. Julian had nodded. Fair, he said. The lease was held by an independent nonprofit trust, structured by Marjorie so no Whitmore relative could touch it. The studio had long tables, proper lamps, locked storage cabinets, a small sink, ventilation, shelves of cotton gloves and archival paper, and a back wall Annie insisted be left unfinished. On that wall, she hung photographs of community murals, damaged family portraits, church paintings, and school art projects waiting to be restored. Not masterpieces, not to the world, but to the people who brought them in. They were memory with a frame around it. Elijah Brooks arrived early on opening day wearing his best brown jacket and the security cap he claimed he was retired from wearing. "You don't work security here," Annie told him. "Child, I'm not guarding the door. I'm guarding common sense." Denise carried in a tray of biscuits wrapped in foil. Mrs. Alvarez brought chicken salad sandwiches. Mr. Green from 2B came with his cane and a toolbox, announcing that every respectable business needed one old man who knew how to fix a drawer without calling a contractor. By 10 o'clock, the studio was full of people Annie had known all her life, and people she had never met: church ladies, high school students, retired teachers, a museum assistant who said she had watched the press conference and cried in the staff bathroom. A father brought in a water-damaged photograph of his mother in her nursing uniform from 1968. A woman brought a cracked painting of her grandfather's barbershop. Two teenagers stood near the window pretending not to be interested until Annie handed them gloves and asked if they wanted to see how linen backing worked. Julian arrived near noon with Samuel and a nurse. He looked better than he had at the press conference, though still thinner. He used a cane now for short distances and pretended not to need it until Denise looked at him. "Sit down before you make everybody nervous," she said. Julian sat. Annie crossed the room to greet him. For a moment, neither spoke. Their whole story had begun with him trapped under a rack, gasping for air, and her kneeling in dust with no idea that helping him would nearly cost her future. "You look well, Mr. Whitmore," she said. "I look improved. Well may require negotiation." "That sounds expensive." "Most negotiations around me are." She smiled a little. "Not here." He looked around the studio. Young people leaned over sample boards. Elijah was explaining crate handling to a boy who looked both confused and fascinated. Denise was telling someone where to put coffee cups so they did not ruin paperwork. Sunlight fell through the front window and landed across the work tables in clean rectangles. "No," Julian said quietly. "Not here." He reached inside his coat and removed a small envelope. Annie's expression changed. "Mr. Whitmore, it is not a check." She waited. He handed it to her. Inside was a photograph, old and carefully sleeved. It showed Grandma Rose standing in front of a half-cleaned church mural, one hand lifted toward the painted wall, a scarf tied around her hair. Annie's breath caught. "Where did you get this?" "Samuel found it in the Foundation archive. Years ago, one of our early conservation grants helped repair several church murals across Brooklyn. Your grandmother's name was listed as a local restoration assistant. She was never properly credited." Annie touched the plastic sleeve with one finger. "She never told me. People are often quiet about what the world refuses to honor." Annie looked up. Julian's voice lowered. "The archive has been corrected. Rose Carter's name is now attached to the project record. Not as a volunteer. As a restoration contributor." Annie looked across the room at Denise, who had gone still near the coffee table. Denise came closer and took the photograph with both hands. Her face changed in a way Annie had rarely seen. Not grief, not joy, something older. She would have liked that, Denise said. Though she would have asked why it took so long. Julian bowed his head. She would have been right. The opening ceremony was not really a ceremony. Annie had refused a ribbon. "We are not cutting anything," she said. "We are opening a door." So at 1 o'clock, she unlocked the front door from the inside, propped it open with an old brass weight Elijah had found in storage, and invited everyone to come closer. Samuel stood near the wall, watching with the calm face he wore when he felt more than he intended to show. Marjorie stood beside him. "You're quiet," she said. "I am often quiet. You're moved." That too. At the first work table, Annie placed a damaged student painting beneath a lamp. A group of teenagers gathered around her. One girl, maybe 14, stood at the back with her arms folded tight. She had deep brown skin, braids pulled into a low ponytail, and the guarded look of someone used to being told no before asking. Annie noticed her because Annie knew that posture. It was how a dream stood when it expected to be laughed at. "What's your name?" Annie asked. The girl looked surprised. "Tasha. You draw?" "A little. People who say a little usually mean a lot." Tasha shrugged. "I don't know. Art stuff costs money." "Yes," Annie said. "That's one of the first lies they teach you. That love has to wait until you can afford the supplies." Tasha looked at the table. "Can someone like me learn this?" The room seemed to quiet around the question. Annie reached into the box beside her and took out a pair of white cotton gloves. For a second, she remembered her own first pair, Grandma Rose's hands. The way she had once believed gloves meant the art was too good for her skin. She held them out to Tasha. "Come closer," Annie said. Art was never meant to belong only to people who could afford the frame. Tasha took the gloves slowly, as if they might disappear. Denise wiped at one eye and pretended she had dust in it. Elijah muttered, "Whole place needs better filters," though nobody believed that was the problem. Julian looked down at his cane. Samuel looked toward the unfinished wall. Annie turned on the restoration lamp. Light spread across the damaged painting on the table, revealing scratches, dirt, old color, and the possibility of repair. Not perfection. Annie did not trust perfection anymore. The fake portrait had been perfect. Real things carried marks. She guided Tasha's gloved hand toward the edge of the canvas. "First rule," Annie said, "don't rush what's been hurt." The girl nodded. "Second rule, look at the back before you judge the front." Another nod. "Third rule, if something looks too clean, ask what it's hiding." Across the room, Julian let out a quiet breath, and this time it came easily. Outside, Brooklyn moved on. Buses sighing at corners. Neighbors calling from stoops. Someone laughing near the deli. Someone arguing over parking. The city loud and alive. And unfinished. Inside the studio, people bent over damaged things with patient hands. Annie looked at the open door, then at the young faces around the table. For most of her life, she had been told to stay behind. Stay quiet. Stay useful. Stay unseen. She had believed, for too long, that if she worked hard enough in the shadows, someone might one day invite her into the light. Now she understood something better. Some doors were not meant to be waited at. Some had to be opened from the inside. She picked up a cotton swab, dipped it carefully, and showed Tasha how to begin. And for the first time in her life, Annie Carter was not the girl cleaning up behind powerful people. She was the one restoring what they had tried to bury. The lesson of this story is that truth does not lose its value because it comes from someone poor, young, or overlooked. Annie Carter was treated as invisible because of her race, her job, and her place in society. Yet she was the one who saw what powerful people tried to hide. Her courage reminds us that kindness is not weakness. Silence can protect injustice. And every human being deserves to be seen with dignity. Real justice begins when ordinary people refuse to let lies stand simply because the liars are rich, respected, or powerful. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.